Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Today is Wednesday, May 8th, 2024, and we are gathered for a land use hearing. As is our tradition, we'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please join us. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you all very much. My name, for the record, my name is John Kafalis, although by now I think we're all family. But indeed, my name is John Kafalis, Commissioner from District 1. I'm joined by my colleagues, Commissioner colleagues, Kristen Stevens from District 2 and Jody Shattuck McNally from District 3. We have Deirdre Sullivan from the Clerk and Recorder's Office taking notes and recording the public meeting. And then across the way, we have two folks from our County Attorney's Office, Frank Haug and Bill Rousseau, John Barnett. Well, actually, I'll pause there and ask Rebecca if you would introduce yourself, please, and your colleagues and your team.
Yes, thank you. Good evening, Commissioners and everyone who is in attendance tonight. My name is Rebecca Everett, Community Development Director, and I'm joined up here at the staff table by John Barnett, Environmental Planner, and Jenny Oxmaker, Planning Manager. Across the way, we also have Leah Schneider with our Department of Health and Environment, Stephen Rothwell with Engineering, and Christine Luckison with our Attorney's Office, as well as other staff available as needed. I'll do a brief overview of our general procedures for tonight. So we respectfully request that all members of the audience silence your electronic devices. Please help yourself to a copy of the agenda and hearing procedure instructions, which are located on the wall to the right of the hearing room entrance. At this point in the hearing, we have closed public testimony, and so there will be no more public comment received by the Board of County Commissioners. If you are speaking, staff or applicant, please wait to speak until you're recognized by the chair, and please make your comments directly to the Board of County Commissioners from a microphone or from the podium or using a microphone. For those who are on Zoom, you will remain muted throughout the proceedings tonight. Mr. Chair, would you like me to give a brief recap of where we are currently at in the process?
Yes, please.
Okay. One moment. So tonight's hearing is a continuation of the hearing of the Thornton Water Project 1041 permit project that began on April 22nd and continued into Monday, May 6th. Now we have continued the hearing to tonight, which is Wednesday, May 8th. We have completed several steps of the hearing process already: the introduction and overview, the staff and applicant presentations, the public testimony, the applicant's rebuttal, and additional staff responses. We are now in the middle of questions and answers, so the commissioners are asking questions of both staff and the applicant team before they move into deliberation and work toward a decision. So this is where we are at tonight, and I want to reiterate that public testimony has been closed. At the point in the hearing in which they closed testimony, no new public comment was received or added into the packet. That concludes kind of an overview of where we currently are in the process, and we are available for any questions as it relates to the procedure. And at this point, I believe we're ready to move back into Q&A.
And thank you, Rebecca. And just to add a comment or two that I don't think I heard, but perhaps I just didn't hear it properly, and that is it's not reflected in these hearing procedures, but there will be an opportunity for the applicant to provide responses to any new items, new information, and I believe we've discussed up to 15 minutes. I want to make sure that is clear. And then it is likely that between that portion of the agenda and before we get into deliberation and decision, we will likely take a 15-minute break just to kind of pause and collect our thoughts, and then we'll move into deliberation and and uh, and a decision. That is the plan. So, as we are all aware, tonight is a public hearing. It's our third Board of County Commissioners hearing. The topic at hand, the issue at hand, is the Thornton Water Project, Segment F, 1041 permit, file number 23-zone 3584. I wanted to state that once again for the record. And at this time, we'll begin with questions and answers. And I will ask Commissioner Shattuck McNally if you would begin that process, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for allowing me to have some more time to answer questions. I have at least a handful of other questions, and I think we're still going to do where we're rotating through. Is that correct?
If I may, thank you, Commissioner. So as we did last on Monday night, our plan is to rotate. So each commissioner will have an opportunity to ask a question. We can follow up what we've heard, but that's how we'll do it. Yes. Yes, please.
Thank you, sir. And I just want to explain to the applicant and staff, my colleagues, and the public that we're doing that rotating, and we're trying to build off each other's questions to try to group them. But there were a lot of questions that I didn't get a chance to ask yet that were on my long list of questions. So I appreciate you letting me go first. And I'm going to ask one of my big ones. And I guess this is kind of a two-part question. And mostly I'm asking it to kind of help the what I think is kind of still a lack of understanding about the options for the Poudre River on this. And so I think in your rebuttal you had mentioned this, and we have talked about it. But I think even in your rebuttal you had said there's still a lot of the majority of the questions are why can't you just send the water down the Poudre River? And so I have two-part question that are both related to that. So let's just pretend that if your pipeline was built overnight and was fully operational tomorrow, which is impossible, I know, but let's just say, for the purposes of my question, and it was all done, and if it was approved, would the level in the water in the river of the Poudre River today, or at high flow in a couple of weeks, let's say it's in a couple of weeks of high flow, would the level of the river be any change from before construction, and if the pipeline was constructed, and then tomorrow it's all done, would the water level in the river be any different? Would it be the same? Did I answer?
It did.
Okay.
I think, just so I can repeat the question, make sure, does the water level in the river at the Whisk head gate, which is where we divert, change tomorrow when the pipeline is on?
Or right below, yes.
Right below. It does not change.
So there seems to be an explanation, lack of understanding. We had a lot of, and I'm asking this question because we had a lot of folks in the public who asked a lot of the same question and a lot of concerns and feel like they needed to speak for the health of the river. So could you just help me understand? Well, I do understand, but to help all of us, the public and everyone here, maybe explain it a different way. Why we cannot consider the Poudre River option at this point today and send that water down?
So very quickly, I am hearing two questions. One, I'm hearing that you would like to understand technically why the water level doesn't change with the pipeline, and why the Poudre River option is not viable from Thornton's standpoint, from a technical standpoint.
Yes. I might miss if that's okay. I know it's kind of a loaded question, but if you wouldn't mind.
No,
thank you for repeating the question back.
Yeah.
I have been working on this question for a couple of days. How I wanted to ask it. So
Oh, of course. No, we are prepared to answer this question. So I appreciate the opportunity to respond. And if you'll indulge me to make sure that I can answer it in a way that provides all the context that's required to fully understand this. Thornton owns one.
Emily,
Yes, sir.
please, if you could talk a little bit, all of you, just talk a tiny bit closer to the mic
Yeah,
so I can hear all of the comments. Thank you. Thank you, Emily.
of course. So the water rights that are subject to this application and that Thornton will be moving through the pipeline are water shares that the city purchased from the Water Supply and Storage Company reservoir or storage company period. And so Water Supply and Storage is a mutual ditch company, has multiple shareholders, originally serving agricultural interests. Now multiple cities, including Thornton, obviously have purchased shares in the reservoir. And the company, sorry, I keep saying reservoir, but back in 1986, 87, I believe, Thornton purchased those water rights, and then we applied to the water court for what's called a change in use of those water rights. And the change of use that we applied for specifically for these shares was a change in type of use from irrigation to municipal, and a change in location of use from the WISC system, essentially Larimer and Weld counties, to the city of Thornton. Some other changes were applied to as well, but that's the simplest way to do it. So we went through a water court process, and to cut to the chase, the purpose of the water court process you can see up on the screen here. This is from our technical report, water rights technical report that's in the packet. But the purpose of the water court process is to preserve the pattern of historical use of the water, meaning this used to be used for corn, potentially, right? Now it's going to be drinking water, and to protect other users on the river while allowing the changed uses for the water rights. So essentially what that means, I guess I'm in control here, aren't I? Essentially what that means is that other water users, whether they're on the river or on the canal, can't feel the difference of this change in use. That's the end goal of the water court process. Everybody is left whole, can't even tell that Thornton's putting water through a pipeline versus it being irrigated on corn. So when we go through that water court process, the court and all of the objectors that are involved are in there making, just like we're doing here, right? They're in there making sure that they're not injured by Thornton's operations. So what's on the screen here is some of the river protections that are outlined in Thornton's water court decree that are imposed on us and we have to abide by. The first one of those is that there's no change in point of diversion. So we have to continue to use the Larimer County Canal as was used when the shares that we own were used for farming and actually still are. And that canal has been in existence since the late 1800s. So Thornton has to use that same location. And it's the same water. That's the big thing. It's the same water that's been coming out of the Larimer County Canal for over 100 years. So nothing at the river changes at all. It moves through, it gets diverted from the river, it moves through the canal, just as if it's the shear water that's happening now. The other thing that the court does is we have to mimic kind of the hydrology that existed before the change. So if you can imagine, water goes out on irrigated farms, some of the water is consumed by the corn or alfalfa or whatever crop we're talking about. And the other water, there's other water that returns back to the river, either through groundwater percolation or through return flows. Thornton or any water user that does a change case is required to mimic those return flows in timing and amount, as if we were corn, if that makes sense. So we have to physically build structures, conduct operations in order to put those return flows back in the river. And then let's see, what else do I want to talk about here? And it's all about, it's really designed to make sure that the downstream water rights holders aren't injured, as well as that stream regime. So the entire purpose of the water court process, as it relates to a change in use, is to make sure that the status quo stays the same. So let me see what my next slide is. We don't have to talk about that. I just want to highlight this. This is really important. So let me pause there. Does that help you understand why the actual hydrology of the river is status quo when Thornton starts diverting the water through the pipeline?
Yes, I just wanted to since we had so many members of the public ask this question, I'm asking kind of for us all to be able publicly and openly for people listening in, in case they haven't read all 300, I forgot, 3,500 or whatever pages, they understand kind of the procedures and the regulations and the things, the water law that's in place. So if you wouldn't mind continuing, that would be great. No, it answers that for me, unless there's something else you'd like to add.
Okay. Yeah, so I think the other thing that I would add to this is that today this water is not in the river below the head gate. It hasn't been for 130 plus years. It's being diverted by the Larimer County Canal, the Whisk Company, out onto those farms. So it's not in the river now. Tomorrow, when the pipeline is built, it won't be in the river either, and no additional water will be coming out. That's kind of the simplest way that I can explain it in terms of the hydrology. I can now move to the issues that Thornton has from a technical standpoint on why the water moving down the river doesn't meet our purpose and need for this project.
Sure, that would be fine if my colleagues wouldn't mind answer that. Thank you.
Give me a sec, if you don't mind. Sorry. Let's see. Yeah. Perfect. We're getting there. We've got a big slide deck here, but sometimes I think the visual will help. So Thornton is building this project for a reason. We have specific requirements out of this project, and we refer to that as the purpose and need. Obviously, we own a specific water right that we purchased very specifically for water supply. We also purchased it specifically for the water quality that it afforded us due to the location that it's diverted up in the river. It's diverted above Fort Collins, above urban runoff, above agricultural runoff. Water providers, if they are able, pick the highest quality water source that's available to them because it's protective of public health. Technically, degraded water sources can be treated. This is true. It's extremely energy intensive, and it also increases the risk to public health because you're relying on chemicals, technology to remove pathogens and that sort of thing, which if we don't have to remove them from the first place because the water's high quality, the source water's high quality, it's just simply more protective. So I can describe each of these a little bit more detail, but the purpose and need of our project is to use the water that we owned, that we purchased, that we took through water court legally, followed all of the processes to do that. We need a yield, which is the amount of water on an annual basis of around 14,000 acre feet from this project. We need to be able to deliver this water to the city of Thornton year round. We need to be able to deliver that high quality source water that I mentioned. And we also specifically acquired water rights in the Whisk system because of the robustness of the infrastructure that already existed in that system. So we've already talked about the canal. A river diversion in a canal already exists, so we don't need to build a river diversion. The reservoirs are a huge component of the Whisk system. We can use existing reservoirs that have been in place for a century without having to build new reservoirs and disrupt additional land. So that was very thoughtful of my predecessors when they purchased this water, so that we were looking at the infrastructure investment within the Whisk system. And then we spent 12 years in water court to obtain the legal right to use this water in the way that we need to use it. We do not intend to go back to change anything a part of this decree because it's a 12-year process and we got the water rights and the privileges that through the water court. So these are our purpose and needs. And this is what Thornton needs to be able to get out of this project. So why not down the river? Simple answer is it does not meet our purpose and need. And I can explain specifically why. We can't obtain the full 14,000 acre foot project yield with a down the river option. And the reason for this is because as any water moves down the river, there are stream losses. Water gets lost to the alluvium, it evaporates, and the state engineer actually regulates this sort of thing, the administration of the water rights. So the state engineer will assess stream losses if you're trying to carry water from one place in the river to another. So that's a significant amount of water that is lost from the Larimer County Canal to whatever point downstream that the Poudre River alternative advocates want us to take it. I think they want us to take it around Windsor. It's a significant amount of stream losses, which reduces our ability to meet that 14,000 acre foot of yield. There's several other reasons why we can't get to the 14,000 that I can tell you about. One, the other piece is we can't operate this project year round if we're delivering water down the river. So the WISC essentially, their water rights are irrigation water rights, which means they're diverted only in the irrigation season from the river. So they're only diverted typically from May to, September-ish. And then the ditch turns off. And so if Thornton were to try to capture a down the river option, we would be limited to that season of delivery. And we wouldn't have any benefit of the WISC storage because it's not going through the canal. And so we likely would have to build a significant amount of new storage downstream somewhere in order to capture that full 14,000 acre feet in that very limited window of time from May to September when the ditch is running, if that makes sense. Or I should even say when WISC's water rights are in priority. They simply cannot divert these agricultural rights in the middle of the winter because that's not what their decree says. So we lose water, we lose our yield that way. We can't utilize that WISC storage. We'd have to construct new storage. You might recall that in WISC's letter, they simply said no. They would not allow a down the river option. They would not allow shareholders in their company to not send the water through the head gate into the reservoirs and then down the river. It's kind of a fast no from them. So that's obviously quite problematic. Also, it would require a new water court application. We currently don't have the ability to. We don't have a river diversion. First of all, at Windsor or whatever location that the Poudre River alternative contemplates, and we don't have a water court decree that allows us to use that location as what's called an alternate point of diversion. That's the technical term for what we would be asking for. So we would have to go back to water court and say, we don't want to take it at the Larimer County Canal anymore. We want to take it down here. And that does not meet our purpose and need because we don't intend to spend another 12 years in water court adjudicating these water rights. I talked about the storage. I talked about the new river diversion. And the last piece, this is a little water nerdy, but there really isn't an administrative mechanism through the state engineer's office to shepherd water like this. You might recall that Northern Water actually had to obtain legislation in order to move some of the water that they wanted to move down the river pursuant to some of their mitigation. So simply carrying water and making sure that Thornton gets the water downstream at a lower point of diversion, assuming we even got a decree, is a difficult administrative prospect. So plain and simple, it doesn't meet our purpose and need. It's kind of like, I've often tried to find the right analogy for this, but we need an airplane ticket and we get a skateboard is essentially what's happening here. It doesn't work for us. I also really want to talk about, though, the negative environmental impacts with this concept of a Poudre River alternative. I know there's a lot of focus on the perceived benefit that the Poudre River might get if this water were put into the Poudre, this water that hasn't been there for 130 years, the benefit the Poudre would get if it were put into the Poudre during May to September when it's there. There are also really significant negative environmental impacts with the Poudre River alternative. The first one is advanced treatment. The water degrades as it goes from the Larimer County Canal or the WISC Canal to Windsor. It goes past multiple wastewater treatment plants. It goes past the city of Fort Collins urban area with multiple stormwater outfalls. There's agricultural runoff that comes into the river at that point in time. So the water quality difference between the Larimer County Canal and some lower point is significant, and it's significant enough that it requires advanced water treatment versus conventional water treatment. Advanced water treatment is possible. It is intensely energy. It requires an intense amount of energy to treat with an advanced treatment process versus a conventional treatment process. It requires additional chemical usage because you're trying to remove all those pathogens. A really challenging piece of advanced water treatment, especially if we're talking about reverse osmosis, which is a specific technology that we would likely be required to do, there's water loss associated with reverse osmosis. You're essentially sending it through such a strong filter that you end up with a significant portion of your water that is unusable. It's called brine. And you literally have to try to find a way to dispose of that brine. But what that results in is water loss. And so it is not a water efficient mechanism at all. So that further reduces our yield. So those are all some pretty negative environmental impacts associated with sending this water through an urbanized area. And then I did already mention the new storage, but without the ability to use this infrastructure that has been in place for a long time, we would have to build additional storage if we wanted to try to capture some more yield and deliver that water year round. So those are the reasons from a technical standpoint, from a practical standpoint, and from most importantly, a public health standpoint, that this just is not something that Thornton is able to do. We're not able to compromise the health and safety and well-being of our citizens in order to look at this option. So it doesn't meet the purpose and need. Is that helpful?
Yeah, that's helpful. Yes, that's helpful. And I asked a very long and complicated question, so I appreciate you answering it how you did. And I want to allow my colleagues to have a turn. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was helpful to all of us, I'm sure. Commissioner Stevens, your turn.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Shattuck McNally, for that question, and I'll just build off of it a little bit. When you talked about mimicking return flows, so that seems a little more complicated in a situation where you're not going to have that sort of seepage from a crop. So how is that accomplished? And because that would be a way that water is returned to the Poudre River.
Correct. I don't have a slide for that. I don't know how.
Kristen?
It doesn't. The answer doesn't have to be so technical in nature for us. Just how is that determined? I mean, the water court determines it. It sounds like
Absolutely.
And so, what does that look like in practice?
So you're right. The water court determines the amount and timing, and we have tables in the water court decree that we have to meet. It's physical structures. So there are physical structures that get placed along various locations of the Larimer County Canal, where we can move water through the canal, and at that very specific location, we release a specific amount of water, sometimes down to natural drainage, sometimes actually direct, there's certain instances where we may be able to actually release it directly into a ditch that might be calling for it, but it's a physical return flow structure is the term that moves that water back to the river. The state engineer, the water commissioner here in the Poudre River Basin, his name is Mark Simpson. Anytime any operator wants to do something with their water, he's keeping an eye on that. He's making sure that you're making your return flows in the amount and timing available. And then the other piece is the state engineer also, we report to them. We report water rights accounting on a daily basis that shows what we diverted, what the return flow was, where it was put, how much it was. And then our water rights accountants at Thornton make sure that it's in compliance with our water court decree, and the state engineer's office does as well.
Just one little. So does that require any additional infrastructure, or that infrastructure is already in place because other folks are doing the same thing?
That's an interesting question. Some of the infrastructure is in place. WISC will actually be building that infrastructure. The various municipal users in the WISC system, which is Thornton, Port Collins, Greeley, North Weld Water District, East Larimer County Water District, and the Fort Collins Wellaville Water District. Those are all the municipal users. If I forgot somebody, I'm sorry. But we all have very similar decrees, and so WISC is working at putting in where those structures need to be, but we're required to pay for them. And we're required to help them size them so that we make sure that all of our demands or all of our requirements are met.
So, and just, sorry, just one little bit more. You mentioned other municipalities. So, not uncommon for municipalities to buy agricultural rights. And so this process of the return flows is fairly commonly done on some of these ditch systems within the region.
I cannot think of more than a handful of ditch systems that don't have municipal users on it, that have transferred water to water court and have these sorts of requirements. One thing, if I may just say about the other water users that I mentioned, the other municipal water users, all of those water users take their water upstream of the Larimer County Canal. Some of them don't even move their water through the canal. They divert it even higher at the Pleasant, at various locations. And so what we are doing is no different than what the water providers that provide water to virtually all Larimer County citizens who are who get their water from a water provider are drinking WISC water that is being used in much the same way that Thornton is proposing to with ours.
Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner. So I'm going to stay with this theme just for a little bit longer, kind of build on that question. And perhaps, Emily, you've answered this, and this will be my turn, and then I'll pass it on. And that is, some of the comment that we heard from folks was that regarding the matter of return flows and the quality of that water. Some people have expressed concern that that water quality would be greatly diminished if that's going back in the river. And if you could help us understand, please, so the purpose and need of what you're trying to do is to get high quality water, pristine water at from the Larimer Canal headgate, which is the historical point of diversion. And we've heard time and time again that that's really good water, although in the past it was used for farming. So I'm a little bit curious about using really good water for irrigation. Maybe you could speak to that. But then on the return flow thing, some folks have expressed a little bit of, or maybe more than a bit of concern about the quality of that water. Could you help us understand what appears to be a bit of a discrepancy or contradiction?
Specifically on Thornton's decree with the WISC system, the water that Thornton will be returning to the river because of our return flow obligations is WISC water. It's water that's in the ditch. Historically, that water would have returned to the river through groundwater percolation, potentially surface runoff as well. So I have never really been made aware of a concern about the quality of return flow water when it's being released from the ditch. There are other instances, and I want to just explain this because I want to make sure people aren't confused. There are instances, not in this instance, where a municipality might use other water, like wastewater effluent, to make return flow obligations. That happens in water rights all the time. It happens on the Poudre, it happens on the South Platte. You're actually taking wastewater, reusable water that you own and returning it to the system to meet that return flow obligation. This is super water nerdy here. That's not happening with Thornton's decree. We don't have the ability to do that because we don't have that type of water available. So Thornton's intention is to simply use the water that we have. We have a WISC share that, let's pretend it's 10 acre feet. A certain amount of that is going into the pipeline. A certain amount of it is going in the ditch to down ditch users. A certain amount of it is being released to the river for return flow. So it's WISC water in this specific instance. So I don't see that there's a degradation in quality because of those return flow releases at all.
Thank you for your answer. That's helpful. Commissioner?
Okay, well, those, I appreciate my colleagues answering my other two questions. So that's helpful. So thank you. So, because those were my other questions. I have them all in order here.
You could cross me
So
out.
maybe I might come back to this again, but let me change gears a little bit. There was a slide that you shared during the rebuttal, and I don't know if you could pull that up, just kind of throwing it for you, about, there was two columns about community benefits. Kind of really shifting gears, but these were two I really want to make sure I got asked. I hope I understand which one I was asked. Which one.
We have it in our deck like 9 times, so
Okay.
we'll get there.
Okay, so if I might, colleagues, if you wouldn't mind, this is like another two-part question, if you don't mind, if that would be okay.
If you are asking me if I don't mind, and my answer is I do not mind.
Thank you. I'm asking some complicated questions today. So this was presented a few times, and as I understand it, and how this is presented, so there's two questions here. I'm looking at this. The left-hand side of the column on the left-hand side are benefits that are offsetting or mitigating conditions to meet that criteria. So could you expand on that a little bit, how you, especially for that criteria, how you feel that left-hand side of the column is meeting that criteria and how? I'm trying to get, I don't want to be too specific. I want to kind of ask, because I have a different question for this, but if we could talk about the left-hand side of the column real quick. And then I would have a question about the right-hand side. And yes, I've been reading the packet, but I want to hear this from you verbally, so.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'm going to just maybe preface the answer with a little bit of an overview and then ask Emily to flesh it out. The way I would describe the benefits that are summarized in the left hand of this column is, first I would say that our analysis in our application reached the conclusion that there were not impacts under criterion T that required offsetting. However, we did hear feedback, particularly from the Planning Commission, that they did not feel that way and that they ought to see some offsetting benefits. And so the reason that we thought it was appropriate to consider the benefits on the left side of the column as being offsetting of potential impacts, the temporary impacts to loss of natural resources and agricultural production, which is what this criterion speaks to, is that these two farms that are referenced here are actually on the pipeline route. And so the appropriate linkage is certainly there to consider these, the plan for preservation, the plan for contributing the sale proceeds to a potential Poudre River Enhancement Fund. There is a linkage to the pipeline because they are along the pipeline route. And I'll save whatever I will say by contrast with the other benefits because I think it might go to your second question. Emily, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I would you like to understand specifically a little bit more about these farms and what Thornton is proposing?
Yeah, just briefly,
Sure.
because I want to get to the second half of my question. Thank you.
Yeah, if you can go to that next map. So as Carolyn mentioned, those are two farms, Farm 44 and 63 are along the alignment. They're circled in pink on the map. So Farm 44 is the one that's around Elder Reservoir, and the pipeline goes, I think, along the northern end of that farm. And this farm has been removed from irrigated agriculture and has been revegetated pursuant to our water court decree. We have very strict stewardship responsibilities under our water court decree. So we've revegetated it to dryland grasses, and it's currently being grazed by a local cattle producer. And then Farm 63 is just on the other side of I-25. It's actually currently in irrigated agriculture still. And again, it's also along the pipeline alignment. The pipeline goes on the southern end of that farm. And so that, because Carolyn mentioned, that's why we thought it was appropriate to tie it to the criteria, because those are two farms that actually are along the alignment. The concept of our offer of the offsetting benefits that we're proposing is that these farms, we understand, have been identified as priority conservation areas under your open lands master plan. They're specifically in the Wellington separator, and we understand that it's important value for Larimer County community to basically try to preserve that separator from having the communities kind of grow into each other. So our proposal is to conserve those farms in some manner. The most conventional way is with a conservation easement. The conservation easement could be held by Larimer County. It could be held by a land trust. That we don't have a preference really. And then, so that those two lands would be held by conservation easements so that development couldn't occur on those lands. And then Thornton would endeavor to sell those properties, subject to the conservation easement, to some entity that can help continue to meet not just the open lands objectives, but also our water court decree. We have to make sure that whatever future use on that land is consistent with our water court decree. Luckily, open lands are quite consistent with our decree, so the conservation protection actually potentially helps us stay in compliance as well. And so a lot of times when properties are sold with conservation easements on them, they are sold at a lesser value than they would be without. So ideally, maybe that helps an agricultural producer buy some property and stay in business because they can acquire property at a lower rate. And so then we would sell those properties and take the proceeds of those properties and dedicate them to some sort of Poudre River Enhancement Fund. We're not aware of one that exists yet. We're happy to help start one up. But the objective is to kind of get double value out of these properties, right? To have them meet your conservation objective. And instead of selling the property and having Thornton keep the proceeds, we'll convey those proceeds over to something that can help the Poudre River.
Okay, thank you.
So it seems to me I would like to kind of move respectfully. I mean, you're getting like multiple questions in here. Can we kind of go, and we
Sure.
can come back, we can build on it perhaps, or we can
That's
come
fine.
back.
I'll come back. Hold that slide. I'll be back.
Thank you. Well, Commissioner Stevens, would you like to offer a question or?
Maybe, maybe I'll try to anticipate what Commissioner Shattuck McNally's question was, because I'm not, I don't have questions prepared for all of these in this theme, but maybe as you go back to that slide, so these lands would have conservation easements on them. So there's, the lands would be conserved for at least sort of a dry, is sort of, just can you explain how that would work exactly?
Yeah, so the conservation easement, and I am not a land conservation person, but what I've learned from speaking with both Larimer County staff as well as Fort Collins and folks that are in this sort of world, the purpose of the conservation easement is to essentially not allow for development, right? But the way that they're individually negotiated can be quite broad. Different types of agricultural practices can be placed on them. They may or may not be open to public use, that kind of thing. And I think all that comes into the negotiation. And Thornton is quite, we just need to meet our water court decree. And so we are very open to whatever the communities want to see along here. If it just needs to be protective of our water rights. And so Farm 44, for example, has already been converted. It's already been removed from irrigated ag. It's got a pretty good stand of grass out there. It's being used right now by a cattle producer, and that's working well. So that could be a continued use under it, depending on if the cattle producer buys it or. The other farm is really interesting because it's still irrigated. And Thornton, when we went, I'll get a little, Commissioner Chair, you don't give me an eye if I go too far afield here. But I just did want to mention that when Thornton embarked on its Northern Property Stewardship Plan, which we've talked a little bit about, one of the side pieces of that plan was what we called our water optimization study. And there are some instances where we can endeavor to keep irrigated lands in production for longer. or potentially in perpetuity if different water sources are brought to them. And so that farm is kind of interesting because it is an irrigated ag. It's actually is a very good producing farm. We've got a fantastic tenant on it, farmer on it. And that would be an interesting one to see whoever ends up with the conservation easement. Is there a way that we can actually try to keep this in irrigated ag? Can we find some alternative water? Can we make it at least, one of the last ones that the water is removed from? And so from our perspective, again, we need to make sure it meets our water court decree, but our stewardship plan identified some of that farm in particular as one that might really be viable, ideal to keep in irrigated agriculture if we can make it work. And so I think that's what we would hope that conservation easement would look like. It would allow continued irrigated agriculture on that for a while.
On that particular one.
On that
the
particular
other
one.
one is already dry and could still be used for agriculture, but not anything obviously that would need irrigation. So
Right.
pasture, grazing or something like that.
Grazing,
Okay.
exactly.
Okay, thank you.
In the spirit of following up with a particular theme, I think this is working well, and then we'll certainly go back to Commissioner Shaddock McNally. A question I had related to the community benefits package. One of the, we have information from the attorney representing 3 irrigation companies with expressing difference of opinion regarding, I think, one of the foundations of your community benefits package, and that is to augment the river, put river back in, or through the give me a moment, put a river flow in-stream flow project, and they seem to have concerns about that. So my question there, Emily and your colleagues, is what is the status of that communication, and are you optimistic that somehow whatever barriers might be there, they'll be overcome? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. I love talking about Pooter flows. It's a great project.
Put flows, that's right.
I would just want to clarify that Thornton's participation in Pooter flows is not a part of our benefits package, if that makes sense. It's just we wanted to share the investment that we had and what we're doing on the Pooter River. And we have no control over that project right now. It's in the middle of water court. We just wanted to be able to say we're participating, we're endeavoring, we want to add water. This is the way we're doing it. So we specifically didn't put it as a benefit, a condition, that kind of thing. It's just in the application as a reference to kind of good stewardship, similar to our agricultural stewardship plan. Moving on to your second question, where is it at right now? So the water court, so Thornton, City of Thornton, City of Fort Collins, City of Greeley, Cache La Poudre Water Users Association, the Colorado Water Trust, the Colorado Water Conservation Board, and Northern Water, I think Northern's an applicant, are all applicants, thank you, to this water court application, which was filed a few years ago. And it's a water court application for this Pooter flows plan. And the idea is the state is the only entity, the Colorado Water Conservation Board is the only entity that can own water rights for in-stream flow purposes. So we need to partner with them. And on the Pooter River, adding water to the river through an in-stream flow program is very difficult. So this group actually ran some legislation with the help of Mayor Jenny Arndt, actually, when she was back in the legislature, to create a framework where we can add water to the Pooter River through what's called an in-stream flow augmentation plan. So it's legislation to create a new concept that's allowable under water law. And so the application was filed in 2021. We have quite a significant number of objectors. The irrigation companies that you heard from are actually some of those objectors. We are in the middle of the water court process. The trial has been scheduled for next year, 2025. But we are in kind of we're kind of in a negotiating process right now, where we're going back and forth between the applicants, all of the parties you just saw, and the opposers, including the irrigation company that we were working with, or that you heard from. So we're in that water court negotiation process. Those companies are doing what what you do in water court. They're making sure that their water rights are not impacted by this program. And it is a new program, and it's a lot for people to get their arms around. And so we're just kind of working through that with them. And I'm hopeful that we can reach resolution where they are comfortable with not only the Poudre flow plan, but also specifically the water that Thornton is proposing to contribute as seed water. So we're kind of in that water court process. It's hairy, but we'll get there. And if we don't, we end up in trial. And the judge helps us sort through all of the issues. And ideally, we come out with a Poudre flow augmentation plan decree that we can implement. And one thing I just want to mention about Poudre flows is the parties that are there. So Thornton, the other municipalities, we've contributed. We've entered into leases with the Colorado Water Conservation Board for what we call seed water. We really wanted to apply for this application with some water, not just a theory, right? We wanted to have some water that we could put in the application. The beauty of the Poudre flows plan, if it goes through as intended, is that water can actually be added to the plan. Other entities can enter into leases with the CWCB. Thornton could enter into another lease with the CWCB and provide additional water. So it's a really great mechanism to establish a framework whereby water can be added to the Poudre River and protected under the state's in-stream flow statute. That's the key. You can't just throw water at the river. It doesn't work that way in Colorado water law. You have to have that in-stream flow protection. Which is why Thornton partnered with the Colorado Water Trust and the Colorado Water Conservation Board, because they're working within the water rights system, and whatever water ends up in that plan will be protected. But the idea of it is to grow, is to add more water and allow water to come in and out of the plan as possible.
And while your colleague is whispering in your ear, I'm wondering, it seems that your last go around with the water court lasted 12 years. Is there any reason to expect that the discussions and negotiations would take less time to hopefully come up with a reasonable solution?
I am realistically optimistic.
Okay.
I am. I think we will get, I'm optimistic that we won't even go to trial.
And it seems like there are a lot of learned participants in this process, some of the groups that you mentioned, Colorado Water Trust, et cetera. I believe you've answered my question more than adequately. Thank you. Commissioner Shattuck McNally, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If we could go back to that slide. So, Commissioner Stevens, I appreciate you asking your question, but that was not my question, but good try. The benefit slide. Thank you. But it was a good question. Okay. So we talked about the left-hand side of this slide, and then my attention was drawn to the right-hand side. So, and I think this was something you kind of added in and just kind of added into the application. And so my question is, and I'm asking this in a specific way. So if you need to repeat it again, I understand. On the right-hand side, since this is really not addressing criteria or part of mitigation, can you just explain to me why this is added into the application, into this very complex application, please? Does that make sense? Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Commissioner. So I think that throughout this entire process, and by that I'm referring also to the first permit application, even though it is not one of the criteria, it has always been, I think, an area for discussion that Larimer County residents, the county itself, wanted to understand that if this application were approved, in what way would it benefit the county, given that, you know, many of the criteria are written, and the vast majority of 1041 applications are really for where the end user of the infrastructure in question is within the same jurisdiction where the infrastructure is going to be located. And in this case, obviously, that is not the case. And so I think there were many members of the public who said, we can see how this benefits Thornton, but we can't see how this benefits Larimer County. And Thornton really, I hope you'll see through the description of their ongoing past, present stewardship, through their ownership of these farms, through the Northern Stewardship Plan, through the work with the Poudre River, considers themselves to be part of Larimer County, and they care about Larimer County, and they wanted to offer forward some additional, maybe you would call them supplemental benefits, to further demonstrate that if this project were approved, there would be some specific and tangible benefits directly to the citizens of Larimer County. And that's what's reflected on the right-hand side of this column. In terms of exactly what those measures are, I'd like to let Emily explain that if that's your follow-up question. But that's the reason why this is in the package, even though it's not a criteria.
Well, that answered my question, but if Emily would like to add to it, that's fine with me, if my colleagues are okay with that.
I don't think I need to do much. It's the same concept as the left-hand side. These are 4 additional farms. Some of them also located in the Wellington separator area. We know that they are in your open lands master plan is interested in seeing them preserved. So same kind of concept. We would agree to conserve them, possibly through a conservation easement, sell them to some sort of local public or private entity, commit the proceeds of that sale to this Poudre River Enhancement Fund. So very exact same concept as the farms under 10.9.T, 1.T. I'll have that number in my brain forever. It's just the 4 farms are not connected physically to the pipeline alignment.
Thank you.
Commissioner Stevens?
All right, I don't have anything else on this theme. Can I?
What's that?
Can I pick a different topic at this point?
I believe,
I'm racking my brain, and I don't want to answer questions that I don't really have.
yes, of course you
Okay,
can
so
pick a different.
I want to go back to some of the criteria. So one of the criteria is air quality, and I think that there were dust was contemplated under this, but no other air quality was, kind of concerns were contemplated under this. So just kind of fugitive dust and how to deal with fugitive dust during construction. So knowing that we're in a non-attainment area for ground level ozone, and presumably some of the construction will be done during high ozone days in the summer. I'm wondering if you have contemplated any mitigation of that. So I'm specifically thinking about engine idling, which is really bad during that time. I'm really thinking about fueling that can be with some of the trucks and some of the equipment. Fueling is not recommended during the middle of the day during a high ozone day, a red flag day, and that kind of thing. So I'm wondering, well, I mean, it may be that I'm asking staff to sort of contemplate some kind of condition around that, but I don't know if you all have thought about that. Thornton's also in the non-attainment area, so you must be familiar with that. But as we're looking to lower those numbers, because if we can't get them lowered by a certain date, we'll be penalized even further, with regard to the EPA, and so. And it's not great for the people who live around there to breathe that. So if you could just address that and how you might.
Thank you for that question, Commissioner. Gerald, I think maybe if you can describe just the general construction, sort of what we can require of our contractors possibly, and then maybe we can talk a little bit about the Envision framework. You want to do that?
Yeah, I'll go ahead. So our contractors will be required to get what are called A-pins from CDPHE that regulate emissions. And they're generally 2 types, typically like stationary equipment that they may have. One of the mitigation measures you specifically mentioned idling it's also related to noise mitigation. is to include in the contract specifications that reduce idling time. So that definitely helps with the emissions. I think there are a number of best practices, just as you described about fueling times, that we can definitely include in our contract specifications to deal with that. But generally, we follow the guidance of CDPHE on the control of emissions from construction vehicles. Now, there's a trend. It's kind of in its infancy. Most construction vehicles are diesel fueled, but there is a movement. I think it's relatively slow growing to move to electric. There are a lot of complications to that related to contractors changing their processes for that. And I think it's somewhat premature to mandate that they use zero emission vehicles at this point in time because there's not very many that exist. So right now we're contemplating standard equipment, which is usually diesel. Colorado, especially the Front Range, is well known for low sulfur diesel as a requirement as a result of air quality requirements. Let's see, what is this? You want me to go full Envision? Okay, so there's some slides we've mentioned about the Envision framework. And Envision has a number of different categories related to sustainability and resilience. And there's three areas related to climate, which is somewhat related to emissions. And so I'll go through the three of them. The first one is what's called embodied carbon, which is the greenhouse gases that are used in the manufacturing of products that get incorporated into construction projects. So we're going to be using the Envision framework to guide ourselves in design and construction. And Envision, has a particular criteria related to embodied carbon, and the means and methods that we'll look to employ is material selection. As typical of infrastructure projects, there's a lot of concrete, there's a lot of steel, and the carbon equivalent for embodied carbon for those types of materials are relatively high, but there's not a whole lot of substitutes for them. But right on this slide, with respect to concrete, there are certain things that you can do to reduce the embodied carbon content by using non-cementitious materials in your concrete. And with steel, and in particular with the welded steel pipe that we're looking at for this project, the vast majority of the steel that is used in the manufacture is from recycled steel, which has a smaller carbon footprint than for virgin steel. So we'll have to work with our contractors and with pipe suppliers regarding the, where are they getting these materials? And I had mentioned about energy efficient equipment during construction and the potential to purchase carbon offsets. Now, the next area related to this is reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And from the operations of the project, after it's constructed, there are no direct emissions. We don't have any stationary sources that are emitting greenhouse gas emissions. However, we do have to have electric power to run the motors to drive our pumps, and that's an indirect source because the power has to come from someplace. Now, we have to obtain the power from PVREA. They're the local power provider, and PVREA has a goal that by 2030, they will be obtaining 80% of the power they provide their subscribers from carbon free, from renewables. Now, Tri-State Generation and Transmission is a wholesaler of power, and they also have a goal that 70% of their energy that they will provide will come from renewable sources. Now, one thing Tri-State has done is they're eliminating coal-fired power plants. So they've eliminated coal-fired power plants from their New Mexico operations, and they have a goal of reducing emissions from their coal-fired power plants in Colorado 100%. And I think that's by 2030 as well. So one thing, when we were discussing with PVREA the source of power for our pump station, was if they had any programs that Thornton could participate in that could offset the carbon footprint of our pump station from energy consumption. Now, they have programs typically for residential where you pay a little bit higher so that you're able to say, I'm obtaining my energy from renewables. But they don't have a program for commercial or industrial. But I think there's an opportunity that as we start working through the process of obtaining power, of working with them on some innovative programs to do that. And then, of course, there's carbon offsets. Now, the third one, which is probably the one that you're most interested in, is emissions. And so from operations, there's no direct emissions of pollutants because we don't have any stationary sources. So those emissions occur during construction. And so, the fuels that we're using, are typically going to be diesel. You can create an air emission control plan that would set some realistic targets. And so it's kind of like a best management approach. And that's where, we can set some targets on the efficiencies of the equipment that our contractors are using. There are the zero emission equipment, which is in its infancy. Cleaner fuels, which Colorado kind of leads with the low sulfur fuels, and there's the limit idling. And now I've commented here on the right, we have condition of approval 17 and 18. They're somewhat applicable to emissions. Especially I think one of them maybe with the noise where it's limiting the idling. And then the fugitive dust, it's the standard practices, and those are covered under also conditions of approval 16 and 18 as well. So the Envision framework kind of establishes, some of the direction that we want to take during the implementation, design, and construction. Is that helpful?
Yeah, that is helpful. And yeah, and looking at those conditions, I do think that they talk about particulate matter more than they talk about sort of like ozone, like emissions that lead to ozone.
Yeah, and that's really the fueled equipment
Right.
that we're dealing with, and that's through the CDPHE APIN process.
Okay. Yeah. So we might want to just sort of add something to a condition that would kind of capture that, the ground level ozone concerns that we have with some of the
Would it be something
tailpipe
like
emissions
present a management plan that's during the final review with staff on how to control that?
Yeah. Commissioner Stevens, would you like staff follow up on that?
Yes, please.
I believe Leah Schneider is prepared to speak to the ozone question and any potential condition language there.
And Commissioner, if I might just add also, in the application packet, attachment 21 is the air quality impact and mitigation report. It starts at page 862 through 865. And some of what Gerald described just now is in that report, including some of the specific obligations that will be required of the contractors in order to comply with the emissions and the fugitive dust specifically.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, and that we did make note of that during the review. And one of the things we had suggested that condition 17 was more along the pipeline corridor, and that was to reduce nuisances for our residents that are in that corridor. Overall, though, best management practices in putting together a plan as suggested by Thornton, we could easily put together an air quality management plan that addresses best management practices that they're interested in using, and that could include the idling. Hold on, I have a couple of common things that we've done, even just the contractor fleet just showing up in their trucks, like commuting to the job site, reducing on-site traffic and engine idling, delayed vehicle refueling to mornings and evenings. I think the air mitigation plan even included that they'll have volatile organic-based paints for some of the finishing pipe apparatus and things. That type of thing could be conducted on non-ozone days. It could also be conducted later in the evenings or cooler days where we wouldn't have ozone production. So yeah, there's a number of things that they could do in a best management practices type of format.
Thank you. Yeah, that would be helpful.
And we can share wording.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I would reinforce that. I was a little bit surprised that in the conditions of approval, 16, 17, 18, and some of those, the emphasis was on dust mitigation, noise issues, and all of that's important in particulates. But I'd like to better understand, and maybe we're getting at that. If this thing is approved, you would start construction in 2025 and 2026, and in the summer of 2025 and in the summer of 2026, when we typically have weather conditions, atmospheric conditions that bring us over put us into the ozone non-attainment. What will be done to reduce tailpipe emissions? That's what I'd like to know. And maybe it's what you're talking about, Leah, but I think we need to have something in there. And I don't know if Carolyn, you mentioned the mitigation, air quality mitigation, and then you said particularly a fugitive dust or something like that. And we get that. That's in there. But I'd like to know, what are we going to do to reduce tailpipe emissions? And I think that's partly what you're getting at, Commissioner. You folks want to comment on that, or should we work on a condition there?
I think the condition that was described by Ms. Schneider would be something that Thornton would be amenable to working on with staff.
Is that good with you? Okay.
Yes, and commissioners, we do have some language drafted for whatever the appropriate point in the process to look at that. We do have some language that we could propose.
Great. Have I lost my turn now, or should I?
I think you haven't. I think.
May I ask a question on a different topic? And then, of course. Well, thank you. I'm glad you brought that up. I believe that's really important. So I hope we can come up with an amenable solution. Just to shift a little bit here, I think I have one more clarifying question, and then if time allows, I may have some questions specifically to review criteria. But there are actually two, but I'm combining them so I get one. And that is, what is the status of your outreach with private landowners regarding to secure easements? And also, what is your status of your outreach to irrigation ditch company and privately owned ditches? Because I think the proposed pipe will cross various ditches. So, and I know you've alluded to that in your presentation, and certainly in your rebuttal on Monday night, that you've had a lot of contact with folks. Maybe you could speak to that, how that communication is going to secure these easements, and also with landowners as well as with irrigation companies.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, for that question. Happy to address it. Yeah, we can go there. As I mentioned before, we have 17 property owners
17.
that we need to work with. Several of them own multiple properties. And obviously Thornton owns two of the properties. Water Supply and Storage Company owns one of the properties. As we've described I have made contact with every property owner. Three of the property owners I haven't been able to have conversations with, haven't been able to connect with them, locate them, and they haven't responded to our inquiries to connect. The remaining property owners, I have had at least one, in many instances, multiple phone calls, on the ground site visits with them. Mainly, as we described, ahead of even determining our alignment, we really just wanted to make that first contact, let them know our approach to this, and answer some specific questions. Of those 17 property owners, we have access rights. We've obtained access to 6 of those properties, so rights of entry have been granted to us. So we've been able to get out there and start doing some survey and really get some important information about their properties and their considerations. And in terms of the actual acquisition process, that's as far as we've gone. We don't have easements acquired with any of the property owners just yet. It's a little bit of a which step comes first kind of thing, and so our intention is, upon approval, to begin that acquisition process. Obviously, in the section that's co-located with Northern's NISP alignment, we'll want to work with Northern on those, at least coordinating on the timing and what exactly we're acquiring. But the conversations have been good. They have had, we've obtained a tremendous amount of information. As Carolyn mentioned on Monday, we have heard from 2 of the individual property owners as Mr. Steidel and Mr. Mowry. They were the only ones that came to chat with you. And we view that as a positive. The other owners know about our project. They might have opinions about it, but I think they're at least comfortable in terms of how we're approaching them, and they know they can come to us with questions and they understand the process. So that's where we're at on the individual property owner acquisition front. I can move to the irrigation companies if that's helpful. So there are several irrigation companies, irrigation ditches that we cross. One of them that we cross quite a few times is Water Supply and Storage Company Canal. So obviously we've been in close contact with them and understand the requirements there. You also heard from the Larimer Walled Irrigation District, who owns a variety of canals and other facilities through there. So we've reached out to them. We've made contact with all of the ditch companies. And it's a similar kind of thing on the landowner side. Thornton, we own. We have a lot of ditch companies that the city owns a lot of shares in, and so we're very familiar with being on the ditch company side of things and having projects cross our canals and working through that process. So we're familiar with the sorts of requirements that these irrigation companies will require to cross the facilities. In most instances, our preference would be to open cut the canal in the off season. We would work with the ditch companies to make sure that works for them. It's so critical with irrigation companies that they just can't be out of water. So we understand that we need to make sure that the construction doesn't occur in any way that impacts their ability to deliver water to their shareholders. So we've made that contact. Obviously, we don't have any agreements yet because we don't have an actual design for the pipeline, but that's where we're at. Would anybody add anything about the ditch companies? No? I think is that helpful, Mr. Chair?
Yes, Ms. Hunt.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, Commissioner, please. I'm sorry. I was in the moment.
Okay. I'm going to, and Commissioner Stevens, I had the exact same question about ozone and stuff, so I can check that question off my list. So you got one last question from me. So I have something a little bit different. On page 131 of the packet, we talk about the exterior lighting and some of our land use code in Article 4. And on the page 4 of the packet, the condition of 20 talking about the hours of construction from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. And this is related to the impacts of lighting on wildlife and especially birds and migratory birds. And some people in the audience know that this is something important, but I think it's really important because if we're talking about impacts to wildlife, this is important. So um, I I live in unincorporated parts of the county, and I have night sky and see the stars, and I have lots of wildlife. When I drive into town, there's been some very large construction projects. I think due to safety concerns, and also there's I think some of the lighting around the tool sheds. It's pretty bright, and that's inside municipalities, which our lighting or lighting protections are not applicable. So there was a certain. So I have a couple of questions how the applicant feels about this, because this might be a condition of approval. I might seek to, if the if this is approved, that I might seek to add, is this is going to be a long-term project, and out in this area, especially with the reservoirs and the ditches, there is kind of a seasonal wildlife corridor, and there's also wildlife around these reservoirs, and birds especially, which are really critical to the ecological cycle and environment and the habitat. So first off, um, for the residents who live there, night sky is something that is valued. And so I know we have our lighting um, code, but as the applicant open to, and there's another second question here, to possibly um, not having maybe things lit up all the time for protection. I know sometimes you have to light up if there's a hole in the ground, but let's say some things are just um, not necessary for safety, but could maybe just be action activated just to help protect some of the night sky and some just lighting up around that area. So that's the first part, and then there's a second part due to wildlife. So is that something which within reason, just kind of just protecting a little bit more of that of the for the residents that are impacted, especially just mostly around the homes. Like it doesn't have to be around the area. So that's the first part, just to think about the residents and kind of their quality of night sky.
Thank you for that question, Commissioner. I will repeat it back if you don't mind. It does sound like your largest concern is during construction that there might be construction type lighting along the vicinity of the pipeline construction. What kind of it? Maybe the first piece is, will there be? What will that look like? The second piece are we amenable to modifications to that in order to preserve essentially night sky and not disrupt wildlife? Is that a general
Question, but I'm
Okay.
going to add on. So just talk about the residents first, because I have a little bit of a specific asks about wildlife. So
Let me see if Mr. Simpson wants to talk about lighting during construction and what that looks like and what might be possible.
and this would be mostly, after operating hours, like at 7 o'clock and things like that. So it'd be after the operating hours at 7 p.m.
Well, if they're not working, there won't be lighting. So, it would be, in those winter months that they may need some, but generally, from my experience, there's a certain, when it starts becoming dusk, especially for pipe laying, I think the work hours, about 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., is a range. Um, some contractors will work all of those, but if lighting's not available, I think I'm amenable to developing some type of a condition of approval to address your concern. But like you said, part of it is balancing safety, because if they are working in dim light, having lighting is available. And I understand exactly what you're saying about some construction lighting for night construction that's very, very bright. And, I think, we would be amenable to a condition of approval to come up with a plan to address that. I don't think it's going to happen every workday, I think it's probably more in those winter months when the days are shorter and they may, to finish up the shift, they still have to do some work at night. And how can we do that?
I think I mostly was, and I appreciate that. I was thinking mostly concerned, at night after they're done and people are trying to, enjoy, the backyard or something like that. But I know there's some construction sites there's been maybe theft, and so they've had it bright, shine a lot of brightness around tool sheds and things. And it's pretty bright because I know why they're trying to do that, to make sure everyone can see who's around the shed that maybe should not be around the little tool sheds. But so that's the first part of that, and then I'll let you answer that, and then I have a second part to this.
Yeah, and I share that opinion. Downlighting definitely helps. But my experience, security of their equipment, a lot of times you'll see, if we have a crane that their tool sheds will be elevated, so no one can get to the tool shed when they leave.
Okay.
And yeah, I mean we're not necessarily fencing the work limits, for security because the equipment, there can be some vandalism, but I don't think in this area, the contractors are normally, I just can't imagine them having lights continuously unless they have a yard somewhere, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that helps. So, Mr. Chair, I want, this is it's connected. So, I want to now, so that was the first part, thinking about the residents, but also thinking about the wildlife, and especially migration for birds and other wildlife. But the external lights will be installed at those source water pump station for safety and security, which I understand why, for safety and security. And it's away from, it's about half mile from residents, and very about half mile or a mile from the roads or the nearest neighborhood. But again, it's near the reservoirs where there's lots of wildlife, and there's certain times of the year, and it's Audubon program is called Lights Out program, and I think you probably have heard about that. And it's basically just trying to ask, especially in cities and stuff, trying to get like the skyscrapers and stuff to turn at least the top lights off on top of the skyscraper, so that birds that are, it's kind of interesting. People wouldn't think birds are migrating at night, but certain times of the year, in April and May or September and October, that is just asking folks to to bring the lights down or even have lights out on those. There's specific nights where we know the migration's coming through, and and knowing that some of those, like you said, the reservoirs have been and those structures have been around for a long time. So a lot of these birds and migratory birds and animals are migrating because that's the things that they recognize as these water structures as they're flying, and it's their pattern. And so with this pump station having external lights, even though there is our code and I know you'll have to meet that code for the external lighting, is it something that you might consider for this kind of program, that during April and May or September and October, not the all 2 months, but there's a specific time frame every year where they know that this migratory pattern is happening, the applicant might be, if this is approved, open to mitigating that further, or even just having one, or I know there's safety and security, but just having those couple of nights to just dim them down even further, or turn them off just for those birds to have that time to safely migrate. Just curious. I know something that I brought up with others, and it's certainly something I'm trying to look at our land use code, because I think it's very important, because a lot of people move out in the country to have darkness. So just curious about that.
I think the short answer is we're definitely open to those sorts of suggestions. The pump station lighting, there's a lot of lighting options that can both meet our security needs as well as other objectives like night sky, what you're speaking of. And there are residences also around those lakes there, so I think there's lighting that they're emitting as well, but we're certainly amenable to developing some alternatives that meet our security needs, but also
Maybe staff can help some kind of, work on with you all on some kind of compromise or some kind of information
Yeah.
to share. And I see Ms. White might want to add something.
I was just going to make a process suggestion, and that is that perhaps similar to the other issue that we just discussed, we could come up with a plan of proposed best management practices that we would implement that staff could review and approve during the technical review phase.
I think that would be, I'm looking over to Rebecca, our Community Planning Development Director. Would that be something staff would not mind if this is a condition or if this is approved, something to look at?
Yes, I think that's a good way to accomplish some coordination to ensure that the intent of protecting night skies and in peak migratory periods or other sensitive timeframes is followed, while also looking at exact construction schedules and operation needs of the infrastructure, if approved. So we can work on drafting a condition that reflects what Ms. White has just shared.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm done with that question.
Of course, you're welcome. Commissioner Stevens?
I don't have any more questions at this time.
Thank you. And I may be there as well. I had various questions that I think have been answered that were specific to review criteria, but I'll go through that, and if anything comes up that you think might require further clarification, but I think for the most part my questions regarding review criteria have been answered. For example, criterion 10.1.9A, mitigating impacts to property held by others besides the noise issues and the pump house operation. I mean, I think we've had some conversation there. I believe you've answered that, but again, if there's nuggets that you need to share. The next one was, I think this was more related to the Article 4.0 development standards, the various criteria there within that particular article, and in particular the air quality. And I think, tailpipe emissions and that sort of thing. I believe that's been addressed. So that was related to E, and that was related to F, and then of course the Article 4 development standards. The next one, if you'll bear with me for a bit, this one, and again, it's based on what we heard from public comment, some of these discussions we were having, but H, project will not have significant adverse effects on or will adequately mitigate significant adverse effects on any existing land use and development patterns, etc., such as neighborhoods, rural development, and certainly natural resources. Q, and again, I think a lot of these have been answered. Planning, design, and operation will reflect principles of resource stewardship, etc. T, these were ones that I had some questions, but some of that's been addressed, I think. T, the benefits outweigh the losses of any natural resources, a reduction of productivity of agricultural lands as a result of the proposed development. And I think the discussion we had regarding the community benefits package, I think that was helpful on the mitigation side and on the additional benefits or enhanced benefits side. Yep, that's all I got. So I'll leave it up to you if you, indeed, once we get through Q&A and you feel like there's new information that you'd like to respond to. But I think that, to the best of my understanding, a lot of these criteria, you've done your best to address them, and that's helpful. I'll leave it at that. Thank you. Commissioner, I believe you're on. You have it.
Thank you. And thank you. I did warn everyone I had more questions than my colleagues, but so I'm going to shift gears again. I'm going back to some of the public comment. So I want to kind of ask two questions here. First, about there was some groups that you had public open houses, and then and I think you said you set out to 400 people, and in that area. But there was also a group that someone brought up called the stewardship group. I'd like you just to explain a little more how that was selected, how long did they meet, and how did you meet, and were there other meetings or subcommittees of those groups? Could you explain that a little bit more to me, and then why, if there was other meetings, can you explain kind of how that process or that thinking of how that expanded, and then how did that go back to the open houses? How did that all connect between the public information group, the landowners, and then I think it's called the stewardship group? So I think there's three questions there. I apologize. So, but I'm trying to connect it all. Did you get all three?
I did.
Okay, cool.
Thank you, Commissioner. Let me start with explaining a little bit about what the Northern Property Stewardship Plan is. Similar to the Poudre Flows augmentation plan that I mentioned, this is outside of this process. It's an endeavor that Thornton began around 2015, actually, as it relates to our land management practices for the 18,000 acres of land that we own in Larimer and Weld County. Just to orient you really quickly, this is how the stewardship plan on the screen fits into this overall big project. We talked about the water, we talked about the acquisitions, right? Thornton purchased the farms and the water. We went to water court. We have, since 1985, had an office in Alt that manages our 18,000 acres of land and works directly with the farmers that actually are the true land managers on that property. And so our stewardship office has been in existence since the mid 80s. And then we went to water court. The water project is here. That's what we're working on right now, is the pipeline project. But the stewardship plan is kind of separate from everything. I guess I have control, don't I? And so the concept of the stewardship plan it's voluntary. This is again where Thornton, we can just comply with our water court decree in terms of revegetation requirements and call it good. But as being a part of the local community for the last 30 plus years, we heard a lot from the community that our property ownership has a very significant impact on how communities plan and what essentially their vision is for their community. And so, again, as I mentioned, close to 10 years ago, we embarked on this process. And obviously, our first priority is to make sure that our water rights are we're able to get our water rights, and we do that in accordance with our decree. But is there a way that we could manage our land in a manner that's consistent with the local area's vision and missions and future plans for that land? So it's kind of a current management, what we're doing today on the ground, as well as in the future, how do we begin to sell these properties? I think it's a pretty commonly understood that most folks would prefer that Thornton not own all this property forever, that it would at some point go back into local hands. So that's the stewardship process. You're familiar with the system here. The dark blue is the Larimer County Canal or the Wisk Canal. All of the green areas, the green polygons there, are the Thornton farms that we own. You can see most of them are in Weld County. So we have a significant presence up here. So the stewardship plan was designed to see how can we manage these properties in a way that's consistent with kind of local vision. We did get outside funding for this. Our biggest fear was that we did not want this process to seem like Thornton was coming in and master planning these communities. We really wanted to get outside funding. We got funding from a Water Smart grant from the Bureau of Reclamation. Obviously, Thornton was a contributor. The Colorado Water Conservation Board was tremendously supportive in this process. We got multiple grants from them. And we also got a grant from the Department of Local Affairs. The steering committee members, which I think, Commissioner, is one of the questions that you had. So again, we wanted this to be a community-driven process. We wanted to hear what the community's vision and objectives were, and we wanted to hear what we thought their possibilities for Thornton's properties were. We did some initial subject matter expert interviews when we first started this. We picked a handful of folks that are obviously in the area, and they gave us a lot of the ideas for this group. Diversity in terms of, all kinds of diversity was important to us. We wanted to get local agencies, so jurisdictions, the counties, Weld and Larimer at the table. We wanted to get the cities, especially the town of Alt, which Thornton surrounds. They were a really important player. We wanted them at the table, town of Pierce. We wanted some economic advice, so we had upstate Colorado join us. We obviously needed a tremendous amount of agricultural participation, so we had some of our own farmers that farm for us on the group. We had some dairy. Obviously, dairy is a huge agricultural industry up here, so we wanted to have a couple of representatives from dairy. Obviously, some state representation in terms of the Colorado Parks and Wildlife, as well as the Department of Agriculture. We wanted conservation entities there because we knew that maybe these conservation partnerships, like we just talked about with the benefits plan, were going to be potentially important for our future land management. So that was how we selected this group, and they spent 2.5 years with us, so they had to be willing to hang out with us for that long. So it was a big time commitment. But we did. We also had water providers at the table in addition to Thornton. So Northern Water was there. I think we had Northweld there. And it was a fantastic group. You can see the representation from, I went too fast. Wow, how did I do that? There we go. You can also see the representation from essentially Larimer County interests. I've highlighted those in blue on this. So Larimer County had a big voice in this, both kind of with your open lands folks as well as just community members that we reached out to. The way that this worked was this steering committee. We had the process facilitated by an outside facilitator. This steering committee helped us define how we collected data, how we shared data. We went into this knowing that we had two specific objectives. One was kind of a land use analysis, and the other was that water optimization study. So we had a consultant that helped us collect data. We shared that data with the steering committee, and it was kind of this back and forth iterative process. And then once the steering committee, once we got to the point where we had enough data to share, we began a significant amount of outreach beyond the steering committee to make sure that we're kind of ground truthing things. I might come back to this slide. But really the objectives that we heard from the steering committee in those early meetings, as well as what we heard from the subject matter experts, were that we wanted our plan to be able to address these key calls to action. Essentially, we heard early on that it's important to maintain key components of the region's agricultural heritage. It was important to try to find a way to support transitioning agricultural economies. There's a lot of pressure on agriculture, and so we needed to be able to deal with that. We wanted to be able to also help the communities promote economic diversification, so that certain communities aren't so reliant on one type of agriculture. And then we also are just acknowledging the fact that this region is going to face some significant population growth. And so how can the management of our lands help do that, help accommodate that in a smart way? Again, I mentioned the two outcomes, land use analysis and the water optimization study. This map is going to make your brain go like this because that's what it does with mine. But this just gives you a sense of the sort of things we were working with. What this map is it's a mashup of all of the entities' master plans, comp plans, and what they think their proposed land uses might be into the future. And then the pink squares, polygons, those are Thornton farms. And so the idea was, how do our farms overlay with the objectives and the visions of the various communities? And you can see, I know it's impossible to read, but generally speaking, yellow is kind of low density housing. So you can see some of our farms are possibly in areas where there might be low density housing. You can see some pressures along Highway 85, which is to the right of the map. There's some commercial desire there. There's some higher density housing. The light green is agriculture. So you can see that the bulk of our properties are likely to stay in some sort of agriculture as we move into the future. So this was just one snippet of the sort of analysis that we did with this plan. And then I'll just back up really quickly. All these meetings, we were basically getting people's reaction to this data. Does this seem right? Do you feel like this is where development is going to occur, and in what kind of way? So lots of community feedback, and in terms of both focused groups, like we worked specifically with the school district that serves the alt community. So we had kind of a focused meeting with them at one point. We had some broader community meetings where our farmer, well, we actually had an entire meeting dedicated to the farmers that farm Thornton's land, so that they could understand what our plans were and we could understand what theirs were. So what we ended up with was, and then the water optimization study I mentioned before was kind of the idea of, can we continue to keep some of the lands into irrigation for as long as possible? Let me see what else I want to talk about. So we finished the analysis, and I think the best way to think about the Northern Property Stewardship Plan is it's kind of like a comprehensive plan, except Thornton doesn't have jurisdiction, right? It's just a vision for the properties. And the way that we wanted to be able to use it was to give our city council guidance on if, for example, someone came to us and said, we really want your property for XYZ. We now have a framework to be able to say, okay, what were the pressures around this property? Was there competition? Did two jurisdictions not agree with what they wanted to see there? Or was it pretty obviously, going to continue to be used for agricultural? So now we have this framework, so we can make sure that anything that we do with these properties obviously meets our water court decree and our water supply objectives. But if we do end up selling it, are there unintended consequences? That was always our worry. This keeps us from having that. It allows us a framework to say, okay, we think whatever we're doing with this is consistent with what the local communities want. And now we also have this entire community, this entire steering committee that we can use as a resource for when we're considering our longer term land management decisions. So we did take it to our city council. They adopted the plan and have directed staff to begin implementing it. And so that's kind of where we're at right now with it. And I completely forgot your second question.
How does that relate to the outreach you did?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay. So how does this then relate to the outreach we did related to the pipeline project? Not directly. So when we had those two community meetings, first of all, the 409 people, those were the people that were sent the surveys, which was the very first thing that happened, and they were very broadly defined to be in our project area. We asked them specifically about site selection as well as some community values. Then we did hold those two open houses in August. And that was really specifically for people to be able to talk to us about the pump station location, for example, the sticky note slide that you all saw, and to give us feedback about, potential routes. At both of those meetings, we did have a station, a learning station about the Northern Property Stewardship Plan, because a lot of people have a lot of questions about what Thornton's doing with its land, how it's being used now, what are you going to do with it in the future. So we did have a station there so that people could learn about this plan and figure out how to engage. And even we were still in the data collection for the stewardship plan at that point. So if people gave us information that we wanted to incorporate in the plan, we could do that. So they're two separate efforts. They're obviously very complementary and interrelated. But the stewardship plan is something that we're doing because we want it and need it for our land management decisions. Is that responsive to, did I
Yes.
connect those well? Okay.
Yes, you did.
Okay.
Thank you very much. And related to that, is that plan and those maps available to the public?
They are. It's
So,
on.
so if someone's listening in right now, where could they find those?
They can definitely find it attached to that resolution. And we might have it on our website, but I would be happy to provide the link to those plans so people can access them.
Thank you. Okay. And colleagues, I appreciate it. I'm almost done. So I appreciate your patience.
Of course, and you don't need to apologize.
So one other thing, well, I shouldn't say one other thing. There was some questions from the public about the wetlands and talking specifically about crossing some of the wetlands. There was no way. There was, I think you even mentioned in some of your plans. There's some in some of those maps. There is you're going to have to cross it. There was no way around it. So I know that you have that plan, and you've been talking to Colorado Parks and Wildlife and some other, and there's a plan. But could you just expand a little bit for me about how that plan is, how are you going to implement that if there's something that comes up, if there's a species, or I see one thing that says there's no osprey, but maybe there's an osprey going to show up. And the reason I thought about this is I was hiking over the weekend, and I have never seen an osprey dive in front of me at Sprague Lake, and so I thought I've never seen that one be here before, and I'm thinking those conditions could change once you start construction. So I'm just, if you could just kind of explain that about some of those that you're crossing and what that plan is, and then if you encounter something that was not categorized or found before, like the osprey, I'm just curious about that. If you could expand and explain that. And my tongue is getting tired, so if I say osprey differently, I apologize. I'm going to drink some water while you're talking.
If I may just repeat the question back to you and make sure I've got it. So I sort of heard you asking two things. One, kind of a summary of how are we going to mitigate impact to wetlands, the overall plan, how are we going to avoid, minimize, mitigate. And then the second question is, with that, understanding that we've already done significant mapping, what will we do to make sure we mitigate impact in the event that we encounter species that we didn't encounter during the initial mapping?
Exactly. Thank you.
So as to the first part, we've got this graphic up on the screen, and I might speak to it just briefly and then ask our expert from ERO to address it in further detail. But the main thing that this graphic is showing you is all of the wetlands in the project vicinity and the pipeline route and all of the places where we first were able to make adjustments to the pipeline alignment in order to avoid certain wetlands. So that's the first part of that. And then where it couldn't be avoided, then we need to minimize impact. And that has to do with how we actually engage in the construction within the wetland. And then the third is mitigate. And that has to do with restoration following construction and the revegetation, the ongoing monitoring, and so on. And so with this map, you can see some of the key locations identified where either it was avoided or we're going to be crossing it, but we're going to be minimizing or mitigating. I'd like to now ask our expert to kind of expand on that and then also answer the second question about the best practices that they employ when you might encounter something that wasn't encountered in the preliminary mapping.
Good evening. Yes, so with the mitigation plan and overall the wetland plan in general, as I mentioned on Monday night, the first step would be to assess and map and delineate where those wetlands are and what the limits are, as well as to collect data on what species are there, the hydrology and soils in those wetlands, in which case then, since all impacts would be temporary and there would be no permanent impacts to wetlands. Sorry, can you hear me okay? Okay. Would be to then restore them and get them to revegetate with species, wetland vegetation species, and to be the same size and conditions as they were prior to construction.
And what if you encounter something that you didn't?
Yes. Did that answer the wetlands question?
Yes, it did.
Okay, great. And then your next question about wildlife and then birds, these kind of, they coincide because they move. And so we have reviewed the databases from Colorado Parks and Wildlife as well as the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service about critical habitat, known mapped resources, but as you mentioned, the osprey can move, and these are what are currently known to be the conditions, but surveys would be done prior to construction and during construction to be sure to account for any movement of wildlife and birds. And then to follow, Colorado Parks and Wildlife has raptor buffers and recommendations, and same with wildlife recommendations for regulated species. And so that would be ongoing coordination and surveys to account for that.
And I guess I don't have to ask that anymore. And I'm sure the answer is yes, but with nesting season, migration, all these things, that's a lot of different conditions to account for. So I'm assuming that's all been thought of and covered and explored, and a plan in place for all of that as well.
Yes, and a lot of it is, an adaptable approach. If something comes up, being able to have that communication with the regulatory agencies and to look at what the conditions are in the area where a resource might show up, if it is a bird, if it is some other wildlife species. And then I think the big thing is just the communication between the agencies, the project team, and then, there's always monitoring and making recommendations and being adaptable as the project moves forward.
Okay, that's very helpful. I appreciate that. And these last two slides have been helpful as you're explaining for me to see that. Thank you. So I think this is my last question. There was 3 property owners you said you haven't been able to reach out to. And I know Mr. Steidel, well, actually, there might be one more question after this. Maybe ask the first question. The Thompson Farm has been brought up a lot. And I think it was even brought up in public comment about looking for that comment. The property and some of the traversing that. Could you just expand a little bit about the impacts and mitigation for that property in particular, and then I'll go to the 3 others. That will probably be my last one then. So.
Yeah, thank you for that question. The Thompson property is actually one of the owners that we have not been able to make contact with in this round. My understanding from the previous application with Thornton, we were actually in the similar area here, that there had been conversations with the property owner at that time who indicated that the preference was to stay kind of in that alignment where the overhead power line was. I think that's right, Gerald. Gerald will tell me if I'm wrong. And so since we couldn't have we weren't able to reach contact, we assumed that that was still the preference, and that is why the alignment at that place traverses that way through the property. Again, at some point, we'll obviously make contact with the property owner, and if those preferences have changed, we would like to be able to adjust that if possible, if necessary, to accommodate whatever that preference is. But right now, we're operating off of what we learned from our previous application, that the preference was to stay along that where that power line currently is. I believe you also asked about what potential mitigation. So similar to the other properties, it's we restore to pre-existing conditions. We work with the property owner to make sure we understand what the on-ground conditions are, coordinate with them through the entire construction process, and make sure that our easement agreement with them and whatever other side agreements we need to enter into are protective of the interest there. But unfortunately, since we haven't been able to make contact with that owner, we're going off of information that we had last time.
So that kind of, and thank you for that. That kind of, and thank you for identifying. That was one of the questions that kind of rolls together. I don't know if this is a question for staff and for you as applicants as well, but if you, if this is approved and this goes forward, if there are the other landowners have circumstances that come up that need to be, they're impacted by this, that need to have a different kind of mitigation. How does that process look going forward if this is approved, if there's issues coming up on those other property owners? I mean, just thinking outside the box, is something unusual that you're encountered? How does that process look, and what does that look like? And then maybe the applicant wants to follow up after that. So,
Yeah, I can answer at a general level. It depends a little bit on what the concern or the issue is, and whether the mitigation needed to resolve that concern falls within the parameters of the conditions of approval and project description and all of that. There is a section of the code for areas and activities of state interest, the 1041 permits, that delineates between technical revisions and permit amendments. So there's some discretion for the director to determine whether a proposed change is considered a technical revision that can go through a technical review that's at the staff level, or whether a change is a permit amendment that requires a hearing with the Board of County Commissioners. So there would be a process to determine how significant is the change. Is there an increase in other impacts, or does it create non-compliance with some other condition, or things like that?
so would that be up to the applicant to notify the county and the staff about that potential?
Yes, anything that deviates from what is documented through the technical review process, or documented through this hearing process, would be required to go to county staff for review to determine whether there's an amendment that's needed to the permit. So anything that is documented and recorded through those processes, the process that we're in now and any subsequent processes, any change would need to be reviewed.
Okay, thank you. So these property owners and I guess I'm assuming will be continual contact and communication with those along, and maybe even some of the stakeholders. So I'm curious, could you just, I know it's probably in here, I probably read it a couple times now, but it's been a lot of information. As you can see, I'm taking a lot of space up with all my notes. Can you just expand or explain to me how the process works for communication with the landowners and those impacted? And if they do have concerns, how does that process work with communicating with you and also with county staff? Can you, I don't know who, I'm going to ask the applicant first, and then I'm sure you'll be answering for staff.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I'm going to kind of answer in two
Yeah.
pieces. Obviously, the first round of communication is going to be easement acquisition. So that'll be what we'll likely be pursuing first, because we can't actually begin further design until we know more about these properties and begin to reach agreement with the property owners. And so that communication is done by Thornton staff, and we also obviously have a land agent that helps us work with the property owner to understand the implications of the easement, what Thornton needs, and what the landowner needs in terms of their protections in the easement. So that's kind of the first step of communication, and we would begin doing that rapidly, especially, I guess even before that is the survey. So for the landowners that we don't yet have access to those properties, rights of entry to, we'll be acquiring those. And so then once the easements are acquired and the survey is done and we understand what what things look like on their ground, our team then begins to go into a design process. And our intention again is we want to be able to communicate with the property owners as much as they want to communicate with us. We would include them along in all parts of that, especially I know there are going to be certain ones that are going to be very interested in that. And so we want to be transparent through that whole process. And I think if there is something that comes up that causes us to end up in a circumstance like what Ms. Everett just described, we would work with staff to say, hey, we think we maybe need to move the alignment here to here, that sort of thing, and then we'd work with them on that process. But that's our intention, to keep the property owners in the loop the entire time. They are definitely the critical part of this, and so that's how that communication would work. Moving into construction, once the design is complete, that again, lots of property coordination. Also, we talked about our construction communications plan, so not just with the impacted property owners, but with the general area, and we'll make sure that our construction plans are one in adherence with whatever terms are in the easements that we have, and also that we're continuing to work with the property owners through that entire process. Is that responsive to your question?
Yeah, just so that will conclude kind of a system of how, whether it's the county or you, how if there are concerns, who do they, if they want to contact, will they know they can contact the county to talk with you or to contact you if this happens, if this is approved. But just, it always, how, making sure people know if they have concerns or questions for a full and accountable and transparent process to make sure that the public and the property owners and those impacted or the general area has the ability to ask questions and express their concerns or their complaints. So
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of Thornton's side, we actually have our construction manager, or our project managers here tonight. They're with us in this entire process. They will likely be the single point of contact, but we'll make sure that the property owners at any point in time know who to get in touch with at Thornton and who the backup is, and we'll also make sure that they understand how to reach the county. I imagine the county and Thornton will be in close contact through this entire thing, so we'll make sure nobody gets left out of the communication loop for sure.
Okay, I think that's all I have. Thank you very much. I appreciate your patience as I had a lot of questions. I wanted to make sure I felt comfortable with the answers. So after reading the packet, you can read the packet, but I also wanted to hear it too. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Stevens, did you have a question, comment, or observation?
Yeah, I did. Thank you. What Commissioner Shattuck McNally was asking kind of sparked a question for me, which is, will there be on-site kind of phone numbers, kind of on signs, like so people can, like if they see something that's feels amiss or wrong, that they can address it right away without kind of having to look at some papers they were handed. I don't know. I mean, I've
Absolutely.
seen that at construction sites. I think that's really valuable.
We do. We might get there with the slide, but if not, I can just say yes. We have on-site signage on our ongoing construction that we're doing right now in Weld County and Adams County. It's essentially a sign that's on site with how to get in touch with Thornton, also how to get in touch with our contractor, because sometimes that's the first piece of communication. In our contractor. Our agreements with our own contractors, we also require them to adhere and develop a communications plan, because while we do have Thornton staff on site observing the project, a lot of times the contractor is actually going to be the first person that a resident is going to encounter, or might be the fastest. And so what you see on the screen here is what a sample sign looks like. It tells folks what it is. It's the Thornton Water Project. It's a direct line to our website, where we've also got contact information, as well as what's going on, what segment we're constructing in, what it's looking like, what progress is happening, and obviously a phone number that actually goes straight to folks on this team. And we will commit to getting back in touch with people. And then just on the right there, you see what our website looks like. So we'll make it very easy for folks to get in touch with us in those immediate moments when they might have an urgent question or an urgent need, as well as the broader communication, so that people know kind of what our plans are and what we're up to.
That's great.
Helpful?
And then, yeah, it is. And I know sometimes, thinking back to my city council days, is that they don't call that number, they call us. And so, which is fine, because they are residents in our community and they're certainly welcome to do that. And then we would probably get in touch with you through planning and thing, because I know there are always good intentions, and then there are the reality of, well, we could probably start this truck at 6:45. And the backup noise is waking some, probably people who live out there honestly get up way before 6:45, but it could be disruptive, and so, or fugitive dust kind of issues that aren't seem to be taken care of. So just, want to make sure that, well, I guess I would just say to all residents and anyone who's here that we're happy to take those calls as well, and get those forwarded and get those questions answered to folks were the project to be approved. But yeah, I'm glad to know that there's phone numbers on site, because sometimes people just want to pick up the phone and get an answer right away and let you know about an issue. Thank you.
And Commissioner Stevens, if I may, two things. One, I agree with everything that you just said about the ability for community members to contact the Larimer County staff directly, whether that's community development or engineering, depending on if it's in construction or operation. If there's ever a concern or an issue or complaint, and we're happy to either route that to Thornton or work to resolve it if there's a compliance issue. And I know that sometimes people are more comfortable reaching out directly to the county than an applicant. We also have condition number 23 that's recommended in the staff report that requires everything that Thornton just committed to related to 24-hour telephone contact line, a complaint resolution workflow, and these monthly flyers to residents. So that commitment is documented within the conditions as well.
Thank you. I'm feeling like, as Commissioner Jody Shack-McNally said, while we've read this and marked it up, and it's retention for 3,000 pages is not as good as it should be. Maybe. Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
I wanted to say something.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to make 2 quick points, and then it looks like Commissioner Shattuck-McNally, before we ask if the applicant requires a little bit more time to respond to anything new. And my 2 points are this. One is that on the discussion regarding wildlife and vegetation, there are 16 conditions of approval that I think have been agreed upon. So I wanted to point that out. There are 16 conditions of approval. And then recently I was reminded that while it's not directly related to the proposed pipeline project, the Poudre River corridor as it goes through town has been designated by the National Audubon Society as an IBA, and I will tell you what that stands for in case you don't know, and that is an important bird area. And I would offer that as just one more reason why we need to hopefully have success with the proposed Poudre River augmentation plan and some of those deliberations in the water court. So I wanted to point that out for the record. Yes, Commissioner Shattuck-McNally.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And yes, I knew there was many conditions of approval for wildlife and mitigation, but I just wanted the public to hear, especially about those water crossings, because I did think it was our wetland crossing, because it had been mentioned in public comment. So on Monday night, I mentioned about the soil health, and especially for the impacted farmers. I think it was the alfalfa hay and might not be able to farm with that disruption. And so I think there was some conditions of approval, especially for number 68 that I wanted. I mean, topsoil is great in disturbed areas, but I also talk about the soil column, and there's the microbes. There's all kinds of things in soil. It's actually, to me, another living organism. I think people at the table probably agree. There's a whole other universe in soil. And so I was wondering if the applicants are open to, I think we had some language ready.
Yes,
and that's in this memo.
Yes,
and I don't know which number that is.
I can speak to that, Commissioner
That would be
Shattuck-McNally.
great. Thank you.
So yes, a memo was prepared and posted to the packet tonight, just prior to the meeting, that includes some staff recommended revisions and additions to the list of conditions of approval. And one of those is a revision to condition number 68, which is within attachment J, the staff memo to the Board of County Commissioners on the second page of that memo. So the previous condition stated that topsoil shall be salvaged and used in disturbed areas, which will be revegetated where practicable. And the proposed revision, or staff's recommended revision, which the applicant actually provided this language and staff agrees with it. It reads that the applicant shall retain a local soil scientist, agronomist, and/or agricultural engineer to work with impacted property owners of agricultural land to determine existing soil conditions, best management practices, and mitigation measures to implement, including the implementation of soil amendments to protect and reestablish the soil health of the soil column, topsoil and subsoil, that will be impacted by construction activities. Those practices will be included in the design and completed for review by staff during technical review.
Excellent. So that sounds like that was submitted by the applicant, so that's great. I love to see the subsoil included, so that's great with me. Thank you. I just wanted to make sure, I hadn't got to look at this thoroughly, so that I appreciate letting me make sure that was addressed. Thank you.
Anything else, colleagues? Then a question of the applicant. We are at that point in our agenda, additional applicant rebuttal time to address anything new, up to 15 minutes. This is your opportunity. I imagine the attorney would love to come up and say a few words. And I will certainly respectfully, grant some degree of latitude, but I think you understand the intention here. If new things have come up in some of our discussions, that would be helpful.
Indeed.
Thank you, Carolyn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. Once again, Carolyn White on behalf of the applicant. And I think I can promise you we will take less than the maximum 15 minutes
And just
allotted.
to assure that, is someone timing this? Yes, they are.
Yes, it's already started.
Oh, very good. Thank you. Sorry.
Just by way of introduction, obviously this is a process. The county establishes the process through its 1041 rules and regulations, which are promulgated pursuant to the authority granted to it by state statute. And the city of Thornton, as an applicant, has followed that process. There may be some who are critical of the process for various reasons. Maybe it's too long, maybe it's too short, maybe it produced too voluminous of a record, but that is the process, and the city has followed it very thoroughly and very respectfully. And at the end of the day, I hope you'll agree that as a result, there was a better outcome. And some of the examples of the ways in which that outcome are better is we have a more specific pipeline route, we have a shorter pipeline route, we have fewer impacted properties, we have fewer impacted wetlands. All of the impacts are temporary and minimal, and we have followed the principles of avoid, minimize, and mitigate as set forth in your 1041 regulations. I want to also remind you that if this permit is approved this evening, that is not the end of the county's oversight. As we've talked about, there is the extensive technical review process at the staff level, and there's also ongoing maintenance and enforcement by staff oversight of ensuring that the applicant is complying with all of the various conditions of approval and is delivering the project as it was described and as it was approved by this body. I also want to remind you that in addition to Larimer County, there are numerous other agencies, state and federal, whose approval of various components of this project is also required. And we've touched on some of them, like the Division of Dam Safety and like the Army Corps of Engineers. And all of those permits, and there's a complete list of them in your packet, are also required and compliance with all of those terms and conditions and oversight by all of those agencies. So I just want to mention that by way of assurance in terms of this isn't the last time that the county gets to oversee what's happening with this pipeline if the permit is approved and it progresses. Throughout this process, we have demonstrated that the project meets or exceeds all of the criteria and that the proposed benefits outweigh any impacts, which are temporary and relatively minimal, and that is with all of the conditions of approval recommended by staff. So I just related to that, want to briefly mention for the record, we have this attachment J, which is the most current version of the recommended staff conditions. And we just talked about one of those conditions, 68. There are also 3 new conditions that staff is recommending since our Monday night hearing. And at this point in time, the applicant is in agreement with all of the conditions as described by staff in this attachment. We are not proposing any additional changes. So with that, I just want to highlight a couple quick things that came up in Q&A that were new issues or that are not extensively documented in the record, because that's the point of this second rebuttal, right, was to address those issues. So very, very briefly, there was a question asked about canal ecosystems, Commissioner Shattuck McNally, and I will admit that at the time that kind of caught me at least by surprise, because that is not something that was extensively documented per se in the record, and that is because the requirement under the statute and under your code is to analyze and study and mitigate the project area. And the canal is not part of the project area. That's pretty clear. So it wasn't really separately called out and documented in that way. But the good news is I can assure you now that we've had time to think about it and look into it a little bit more, that notwithstanding the fact that it wasn't considered as a separate issue, that there will not be any impact to canal ecosystems as a result of this project. And the reason for that is, as you remember, Emily described to you all of the obligations that the City of Thornton has under the Water Court decree to ensure that all of the water deliveries to all of the other users on the canal are maintained at the right time, at the right place, in the right quantities, and at the right quality. And in order to do that, she described those check structures that are installed by WISC that raise the level of the water so they can be delivered into the ditch in the appropriate location. And in consultation with our biologist, it turns out that what those ecosystems really rely on is the water level, not the water quantity. And so even though there will be less water in the canal as a result of part of it being sent down the pipeline, the water levels will be maintained and the ecosystems will not be impacted. So I just wanted to get that answer with a little more clarity and specificity. And also in the wetlands mapping, to the extent these canals do cross other wetlands, they are included in that mapping. We just didn't have them circled on the map separately. So all of that is in there. We talked a little bit about the soils, and so I won't repeat what I was going to say about that. Obviously, hopefully condition 68, which we just talked about, addresses that to your satisfaction. I also had mentioned that I had also planned to talk a little bit more about carbon emissions, and we addressed that through Q&A this evening, so I won't go into any more detail on that. So just I want to take a moment to acknowledge what a truly community-driven process this Larimer County 1041 process has encouraged the City of Thornton to engage in. And also, as I mentioned at the beginning, to point out that Thornton very much respects and followed this process and follows the rules, and in fact has gone above and beyond with expectations in that process in designing this very extensive community outreach that is above and beyond what is required in a typical 1041 process or in the code. Also, many Larimer County community members testified about their deep feelings for the Poudre River. We hope that through this process, you have seen that Thornton cares deeply too. This is why Thornton has already begun participating in some of the various initiatives that you've heard about this evening, such as the Poudre River Augmentation Fund, such as the Northern Stewardship Plan, such as why it's proposing to contribute even more as these additional community benefits through this process, if this permit application is approved. Approval of this application could be a really great example of local communities working together to solve regional problems in such a way that perhaps the state might be persuaded that it does not need to intervene and direct local governments how to manage their growth. It would amplify the idea that trust between local governments leads to beneficial results for both communities. Just a quick bit of housekeeping. I want to ask to confirm that the 3 handouts that we handed out on Monday night will be accepted into the record. Those would be the summaries of the public comment. And then I also want to formally request that the slides that we showed tonight become part of the record, and I have those slide numbers which I can provide to staff. And then to make just one final concluding remark, I'd like to ask Brett Henry to come back to the podium. He started us off, and we'll ask him to conclude. Thank you.
Commissioners, Carolyn, that was 8 minutes, just so you know. Brett Henry, Thornton City Manager. Yes, Chair.
6 minutes and 52 seconds.
Brett Henry, Interim City Manager. I'm not an attorney. I will not take the remaining 6 minutes and 45 seconds. As I do wrap up, I want to thank commissioners for their engaged discussion. I absolutely want to thank the public. I know it's been a long process. We joked several times about the 3,000-page document. throughout times, we've been pretty eager to talk about it, and I apologize for the long-winded answers, and I know we're on the third night of this hearing, but because we have tried to follow these rules and go above and beyond these rules throughout this process, and we were excited to talk about it and excited about what we were doing with this project. So, again, I appreciate the engagement from everybody in this process. In addition, I want to thank the staff. We inquired many times with staff about the intent of the criteria beyond the written words at times, just to make sure that and understand that we were really hitting the goals that the commissioners wanted to see. Chair Kafalis, I also want to recognize that this is the second time you've had to endure this process, specifically with Thornton and here in the 1041 permit application, and I know that's difficult. I do want to point out, and hopefully you felt it too, this has been different, at least from our perspective. The feeling, the entire atmosphere has been different, and I'm appreciative again because of that process that we took to engage the community to hear that first, to inform our design and the project. We tried to demonstrate how we learned from the last hearing and how we not only listen to your community and to Larimer County's guidance, but also how we are responsive in ways that affect positive change. My hope is that all the commissioners can see that we've tried to be as collaborative as possible and have intentionally tried to go above and beyond in a way that maybe sets a new model for how communities can work together on large projects like this. On behalf of our mayor and city council, they want to thank you also for your consideration. I appreciate the clear guidance you gave throughout this process and managing the meeting as well for something as big and complex as this is. So thank you to that. And again, thank you to the other commissioners. So with that, I'll wrap it up. Again, 5 minutes remaining, and we respectfully ask approval of our permit application. Thank you.
Thank you for your kind words, Brett. And to your request, your procedural request, Carolyn, yes, of course, the documents that you referenced will be included as part of the public record. Well, my goodness, it's 8:25 p.m. As I suggested earlier, I think it's more than appropriate that we take a 15-minute break to stretch, kind of think through a few things, and let's do our best to resume at 8:40 p.m., please. Thank you. We'll go into recess. All right. Thank you all very much for engaging in this process. We took a 15-minute break, a needed break, and we'll resume. Before we get into the deliberation and decision-making portion of this hearing, I'd like to ask Rebecca if she could just do a review of the newer conditions of approval and proposed language for the three ideas I believe that came up this evening. Rebecca, please do that.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I'm happy to do that, though I just discovered I disconnected from the Zoom meeting. So if you'll give me just one moment to reconnect, and then I can share my screen.
Absolutely. I think there's a great value in taking a deep breath and pausing now and then.
Okay. So as you referenced, or as has been referenced this evening, a memo was provided by community development staff to the commissioners this afternoon that outlined some proposed or staff recommended changes and additions to the list of conditions of approval that were previously recommended in the staff report. There were several proposed revisions to conditions that were included in the packet for the May 6th hearing as well. And we do have all of those conditions available to bring up in case there are questions on those or any other conditions. But I'm going to quickly review the conditions that were added into the packet this evening and were developed based on questions that came up during the May 6th hearing. So first is a recommendation related to condition of approval number 7. And so this table on the screen here, and I will zoom in a little bit. So it's a little easier to read from a distance. The column on the left you'll see here is the previous staff recommendation from the staff report. The column on the right is the current recommended revision that staff has proposed, or in some cases, the addition of a new condition. So this first is related to condition number 7, which envisioned minor adjustments to the routing of the pipeline to avoid impacts to wetlands and wetland buffers specifically. In the revised condition, it proposes that the pipeline can be adjusted anywhere within 100 feet on either side of the center line of the approved pipeline route, as it was stated in the application for the 1041 permit, which provides an installation envelope of 200 feet. Changes within that 200-foot envelope would be subject to a couple conditions. The first is that the deviation would not move the location of the pipeline from one property to a different property, so the deviation must occur within a given property. 2, the property owners where the deviation would occur consent in advance to the deviation. And 3, that the change in pipeline alignment demonstrates compliance with all other review criteria and conditions of approval. I'm going to go back up and point out one other notable point in this condition, and that is that reconsideration, if there's a deviation that is outside of this 200-foot alignment and there's reconsideration of the permit is needed on a permit amendment, this condition would allow for reconsideration by the Board of County Commissioners or the Community Development Director only to the portion of the pipeline alignment for that particular land parcel and would not reopen the entire 1041 permit. So I wanted to call that out. The next condition we've already reviewed, that was condition number 68, which relates to topsoil salvaging and ensuring the reestablishment of soil health along the pipeline alignment. The next condition that was modified was condition 76, which relates to coordination with the dam safety branch of the Colorado Division of Water Resources related to the high hazard dam at Windsor Reservoir number 8. And there's a slight modification in wording on this condition that states that the applicant shall obtain any necessary approvals from the Dam Safety Branch of the Colorado Division of Water Resources related to not only the Windsor Reservoir number 8, but also any other structures that are regulated by the division, including other high hazard dams or other regulated structures prior to the approval of the technical review. Next, we'll move into a few new conditions that staff proposes. First, number 77, the applicant shall exercise due diligence to locate all known underground utilities and other underground facilities that may be impacted by the construction of the Thornton Water Project and pothole those utilities where appropriate, and shall incorporate the results into their submittal for technical review. So this relates to coordination with other underground utility providers in particular. The next condition relates to tree protection and tree mitigation. So condition number 78. Bear with me, I am going to read through this condition and try to explain it, but it is a bit long. So the intent is to minimize disturbance and mitigate impacts to trees along the pipeline route. And so during the technical review, the applicant shall accurately identify the location, species, size, and condition of all trees along the pipeline alignment and label those with the applicant's intent to either remove, transplant, or protect the tree. The applicant shall also retain a certified arborist to conduct a full tree inventory and evaluate the health of and make recommendations related to the retention of significant trees where the drip line for that tree is within either the temporary or permanent easement of the pipeline. For trees that are proposed to be removed, the applicant must demonstrate why it is technically infeasible to avoid impacts to the tree and to the tree's critical root zone. Where it is not feasible to protect and retain a tree or to transplant that tree to another location, Thornton shall replace impacted trees either on the property or offsite in another location in accordance with Thornton's own development code, the section of their code that relates to tree protection and replacement. If avoiding impacts to trees results in greater impacts to county right-of-way, so the pipeline needs to move closer to county right-of-way or into county right-of-way to avoid impacts to trees, then efforts should be made to minimize disruptions to road users and traffic patterns and should comply with all other conditions of approval that relate to the county right-of-way. So there's a cross-reference there to some other conditions. Finally, condition number 79 proposes that for the portions of the pipeline that are co-located with the NISP pipeline, the lateral separation between the two pipelines shall be minimized to the greatest extent feasible, and the applicant shall coordinate in good faith with Northern Water regarding simultaneous construction of the two pipelines along as much of the co-located route as possible. Would you like me to also review the additional conditions of approval that we have drafted tonight in response to some of your requests?
Yes.
Okay. Let me get there. Okay. So we are now into the 80s in our conditions. I will zoom in a bit more here. Okay. So first, the proposed condition that relates to the ozone discussion that you had earlier. And the proposed language here for condition 80 is that an air quality management plan shall be provided at the time of technical review for the pump house and the pipeline, which outlines best management practices to be implemented by City of Thornton and associated contractors to reduce air pollutant emissions during construction. So this is written more broadly than just ozone, but it addresses pollutants that include ozone in a better way than some of the conditions that get at dust and particulate matter and other potential sources of air pollution. Related to lighting, we would propose 2 conditions here. I can't get it quite exactly on screen. The first condition relates specifically to the pipeline construction. The second condition relates to the pump house. So the first condition would require that an exterior lighting management plan be provided at the time of technical review that outlines specific requirements and best management practices to be implemented by Thornton and associated contractors related to lighting operations during pipeline construction, with the goal of minimizing light pollution, disturbance to nearby residents, and disturbance to migratory birds and other wildlife. Included in this is also a suggestion that lighting outside of the standard operating hours of 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. should be avoided and is subject to review and approval by Larimer County staff on a case-by-case basis. And if there's a desire to further limit lighting operations to the windows of peak bird migration, there's some suggested dates or potential dates for consideration there that would capture that window on an annual basis. So that's also something that could be considered. Finally, related to the pump house, typo there, a lighting plan shall be provided for the pump house site at the time of technical review that complies with all exterior lighting standards in Larimer County's land use and building codes, the versions of those codes that are in effect at the time of that application, the technical review application. The lighting plan shall address how lighting would be controlled and operated to, again, minimize light pollution, disturbance to residents, and disturbance to wildlife. So that's the language that staff has drafted to recommend further compliance, and I can stop sharing and pull up any condition language that you may want to discuss or suggest modifications to. All of this is open for discussion.
Thank you, Rebecca. Colleagues, do you have any questions, comments, observations? Commissioner Shattuck McNally.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Rebecca, on 81 for I think it's 81, the pump house, since it's ongoing, it would also, further limit between would be for that one as well. But I think 2 months is a big time. I guess if during that time there's a peak time and it's like a day or two where it's really crucial, that I would think that would be the important time to further limit that lighting. So I don't know how to word that, but I think those are the times that Audubon says it could happen. So I don't think the whole 2 months, but it's this peak time when it's coming. I know it's coming up, and I know Northern Water knows, I think, or some others know exactly the date this year. I think it is kind of like next week or this week. I feel like that condition of further limit the ongoing, because that will be ongoing impacts to the environment for the pump house. And since probably the lighting won't be happening at night for the other, then I think that's a shorter term impact, and the other one would be ongoing longer. So,
yeah. So if I could ask, well, I'll comment on the time frame for migratory birds, and then I have a clarifying question as well. We could work on some language that tries to narrow that time frame into the days of peak migration. It's a little more difficult to enforce if we don't have specific dates to tie it to or that are agreed upon in advance. So, the advantage of defining a window is that it's more clear and predictable for everyone, but it would potentially include a larger time frame. We could narrow that from mid-April to mid-May, or try to hone in on more of a 2-week period or something to that effect. And then as it relates to the pump house operating hours, so presumably there wouldn't be any. Presumably, if there's lighting at the pump house, it would be operating at night year-round in some way. We could work to We could look at adding something related to only motion sensor lighting, or no lighting past a certain time of night or certain time after sunset, or look at other ways to narrow in a time frame for that pump house. I don't know that the language of the hours of 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. would make sense for the pump house, because there wouldn't be light during a lot of that time anyway.
I'll take staff recommendation for the lighting plan, and maybe it is enough of the language to be for the disturbance of migratory birds and other wildlife. So go ahead, Mr. Chair.
Just a suggestion, and I know as part of the technical review process, there'll be consultation with various the Colorado Parks and Wildlife and others. Perhaps the reference could be based on their recommendation. That's what.
I think that's a great suggestion. Maybe we could ask local Audubon chapter, that they would probably have more of a easier way to since it's their lights out program, that would be helpful. So how that would word to Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and there's also the Northern Colorado Bird Conservancy or something like that, but some of those experts on the migration would be.
Isn't it already included it specifically calls out the Parks and Wildlife and also the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, or that's not the case?
Yes, there is a condition that more broadly ensures consultation with Colorado Parks and Wildlife and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service as it relates to impacts to wildlife species. As it relates to lighting, it would be, I don't know that it would be overly duplicative to include it here too. We could certainly include it here too, and a reference to local other
local Audubon.
local Audubon Society.
Thank you.
You have anything, Commissioner Stevens?
No, this looks good to me.
Then I think it would be appropriate to ask the applicants if these new proposed conditions of approval are things that you find acceptable.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes.
Thank you. You're welcome. Is there anything else, Rebecca, that we need to be discussing regarding conditions of approval?
No, I'll just note that we have every condition of approval ready to pull up on screen if there's anything that you would like to look at more closely.
All right. Well, I believe that we can move into the part of this hearing that we've all been waiting for. Commissioner Stevens, would you be kind enough to begin the deliberation, please?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I would. So first of all, I just want to thank everybody who came out for the past few nights for public comment. The public comment was robust and it was good. And, when we say we had a 3,000-page document, I think this is how much, and that's probably 800 pages or so, of additional comments that we received via email. So we have read through a lot of public comment in addition to hearing your public comment. It's clear that people in our community love the Poudre River, and I would say that's the same for the commissioners up here. It's really the lifeblood of our community, and so that passion came through in all your comments. And we tried to re-ask the questions that you asked us on your behalf when we were speaking to Thornton staff today. While our 1041 regulations allow us to consider alternative siting for a pipeline, the Court of Appeals held that Larimer County can't require Thornton to send its water down the Poudre River, and I think you heard that tonight. It would exceed our 1041 jurisdiction, which is given to us through state statute. So we have to abide by that. It's that's a matter that's reserved to the water courts. So we're sort of left with
a decision that's not very easy to make, especially after hearing public comment. And certainly, I think that all of us, maybe I can at least speak for myself, when I wish that was the option, that we could just say, let's send it down the river, because it's what our community wants, and it feels less harmful to our community than the other solution. So we can't do that, and so we have to look at an option that, so we're left sort of with what kind of pipeline alignment would work best for our community. I think that the pipeline that was proposed by Thornton is probably the best of what feels like a bad solution. And it's certainly shorter, it goes through less properties. I think that they did a pretty good job of interacting with the community around pipeline routing. Certainly tried to take that into consideration as they chose that route. I'm in looking, I think that's the questions that we asked during this process were, making sure that that Thornton did follow the criteria that we have laid out in our 1041, and we did have stricter 1041 regulations that we enacted as a board a couple of years ago, because we wanted to protect the environment, because we wanted to be able to address things like air quality with these kind of big projects. We wanted to address habitat for animals and birds. We wanted to make sure that we weren't adding to the carbon footprint, and that would be mitigated for. I don't think they're perfect 1041 regulations, but I think they're better than they used to be, and I think we certainly probably found some ways in which we could beef them up after this hearing. So in looking at the criteria, I think, especially with the 83 conditions that we've laid out, that Thornton has met the criteria. As their lawyer said, we still have opportunities to take a look at their plans through technical reviews, and there's certainly state and federal organizations that will also look through their plans. So I'm certainly open to hear from my fellow commissioners, but both our planning commission and our county staff feels like this application meets the criteria with those conditions laid out today. And I would agree with that. And I just want to thank our planning commission and our staff for the work that they've done. This is, we're not the only ones who had to read 3,000 pages. And so I want to thank them for their work on this document and their work over the past few nights. And so I guess I'm open to hearing from my fellow commissioners, but that's what I'm feeling at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Stevens. Commissioner Shattuck McNally.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so I'm going to sound a little repetitive, but a lot of what Commissioner Stevens has stated, I was going to say as well. But I need to speak from my heart tonight. I started to write out my comments, but I didn't want to sound scripted, because I wasn't sure. I still was conflicted all the way through the last few days, and even up till this moment, about how I was going to vote, or where I was going to lean. So first, let me just say some thank yous, and then so I don't forget that. But I want to thank our staff and our planning staff, our county staff, our county administrator, our county manager, assistant manager, our CPERS director, a lot of folks who have put a lot of time and effort into this project, this application, supporting each other, supporting us, and our county attorneys who have helped support everyone, and all the from the health department, Leah Schneider, engineering. We have a lot of staff here in the room who have been spending a lot of time trying to work through this application, and even beyond that, we had staff work on these 1041 applications regulations that we went through to update. So first, thank you to all the work you did. It's been really helpful and very interesting to work on this process and how we've tried to structure these hearings so it's publicly accessible and all the time that public needed for public input and public comment. I really am proud that we've been able to kind of work together and allow the hearing to kind of go forward as it did. Thank you to the public for all. I mean, Commissioner Stevens had said all the emails that have come through and comments and documents and just reaching out and speaking. And I heard you. We listened. We tried to answer some of the questions and respond to your concerns. It's not easy sitting in the seat. It's easy to be out there, and I just want to thank them for engaging and sharing their passion and their concerns with us, because as Commissioner Stevens stated, we hike along, we walk along, we care about the pooter. We're up in the burn area. We're up along all the way up to the headwaters to where the pooter starts. I spend time up there every year. And I want to thank the applicant for being open to all of our questions and to have that public engagement and have that community-driven process, and I appreciate that very much, because it is important. This is a area, as someone of the folks stated, this is not about Thornton's residents, because we're up here supporting our county, and it's about our residents and how our landowners and our residents are impacted. We do care about our whole community and regionally, and we care about our colleagues and your community members. But we're here to speak and think about what's best for Larimer County and how this matches our process and our 1041 protections, I call them. And as we know, for those who maybe don't know, 1041 matches is for those that law back in 1974, I believe. They gave us that opportunity to have local permitting control of areas of statewide concern. And so when we saw, people still ask me the question, why is it called 1041? That's why, because it was that House bill name or number. And so when we first came on the board, our 1041s hadn't been updated for 2 decades. And so staff worked very diligently and very hard to update our 1041 regulations. And that was in between these 2 applications. And I kept pushing that I wanted every tool in the toolbox, every tool that we could have for protections for our community, mitigate any kind of impacts to our communities and our residents, and to our water, to our streams, to our wetlands, to our wildlife, to our soils. It was nice to be able to expand that and have a lot more things to consider, and to increase some of the things that we can have under consideration. I think we increased a couple of those categories as well. And so I think I know they're probably different, and I think you mentioned it before. They're pretty robust, but I think that those new regulations brings applicants who are looking to do some kind of construction project or a project in our community. They have to bring their A game. This is not an easy process, and there's a lot of steps, and bringing your A game is a lot of work and a lot of concerns in this. And there has been a long process and a lot of entry points and a lot of discussions. And so I really want to say thank you to my colleagues and to the staff as we worked hard on those 1041 regulations and updated them. I do think it helped us have and it's not perfect, as you said, Commissioner Stevens, but I do think that it's much better than the ones before, and I think it did bring a stronger application. And I think the process also was probably a little more community-driven and engaged. So that's important to me, to make sure those were impacted, and not only humans, but our wildlife and our trees and our water and all of that. So with that being said, I have my commissioner hat, but I'm also born and raised in northern Colorado and raising my family here now, and I'm a human being. And I love to live outside. I like to be out and I like to hike along water. And that's why I make sure I hike up to the headwaters of the Thompson, the Poudre, and the Colorado every year. You can only do that at certain times of the year, but it's really important to go up there and understand where water comes from and what it has to go through to get where it goes. And I'm really big on forest health and the trees, why that's so important, why watershed health and forest health are so linked and integral and overlapping. And so it's something that as a commissioner I have grown even more deeper in my appreciation and passion about what we need to do. So I did not go into this process blindly. I've had a really critical eye, but I also have to speak to my human side and my love of the outdoors and my love of the Thompson and the Poudre and all the other tributaries and streams, which is why I've been really concerned about wetlands and fins and things like that. So, and I wish there was a way that we could keep the water. I wish there was a way to allow the water to stay in the river as long as possible, because I do, watching and growing up here and watching how conditions have changed, just and seeing floods right outside my door. It's something that I struggle with. Is how do we save and protect and speak for the river that's just way over appropriated? It's something I struggled with through this whole process, and that's why I spent a lot of time just making sure all these criteria that we had added were. I looked for things. I was looking to. It's important that I felt that I could feel my human side knows that I looked at really thoroughly and critically through this whole application. And I wish we had the ability to do more to help the Poudre and other areas that we're going to have that I'm sure are coming. And I wish we could, but this is the system that we have in Colorado. The Colorado water system and the Colorado water court system. And it's been that way for a long time, and I wish it was different, but it's a system that I can't change today. As it was mentioned earlier, it was 12 years just for Thornton to change this use and to that decree. And water court and water decrees are serious business. They're really hard to change and I realize that. And if there was a way that I had the ability to help the Poudre and find a different option to keep the water and for it longer for the health of the Poudre, I think someone would have found it, and I wish I had that authority, but I don't tonight. And so at the end of the day, I have to, put my commissioner back hat on, and we have a process and a set of criteria, and we have to follow that. And so, unfortunately, changing water decrees and water law is not one of the things that are in our purview and our jurisdiction. So there's a couple things that I wanted to point out, because I'm not going to go through all of the criteria, but there's a couple I just wanted to mention that I felt were I was pleased to see have been met. And I am pleased that it's amazing there's A3 conditions, and I appreciate that we could add a couple more as we went along. But that just speaks to that we're trying to get this as best we can to being right, but it's not perfect, and that's why I'm glad that we're talking. There's still lots more things to do. But one thing that was important for me was the condition L of, and I'm just going off of, is trying to figure out which page am I going to read these off of, but I'm just going off of the review. When we talk about review criteria 10.9.1, E7 with the soil conditions not permanently affected, I appreciate that we have that condition now to really talk about the soil column and stuff. So for me, that was one condition that I had concerns about. And so to have that, I do now feel like that condition has been addressed. And so E.7, sorry. So I wanted to call that out. The other one is, and I'm not going to go back and say 10.9.1, I'm just going to say L, because it is getting late. And the floodplain, I did have concerns about that, but reading the application and engineering did a great job of talking about that. I do feel that condition of, with those conditions of approval added, I feel a lot better about that criteria has been met. With the condition of approval on the ozone quality, I feel like that also, and I don't know which criteria that is, but that also was a concern I had about the air quality, because it didn't say air quality, and I'm glad that we got to address that. So thank you, Commissioner Stevens, for answering one of my questions, but I'm glad you had the same question. And then the conditions of approval for the wetlands and the migratory birds and night sky, trying to really do as least harm and damage to minimize, minimize, and mitigate to our wildlife and to the night sky and to migratory times, because those are really, really critical for our wildlife. I feel like those have addressed and have been met as well. And then I have to say I'm pleased that my questions and my concerns about canal ecosystems, because I see them. I see them every day. And there's bears, mountain lions, eagles, blue herons, fish, elk that are seasonal. And the levels go up and down. So they are, especially have been around for 100 years, they are ecosystems. Just like fens and highland water wetlands that dry up, just like those are, they may not be there all year round, but they're important and critical ecosystems. So I appreciate you acknowledging that and taking that into consideration, because to me, they've been around for so long. They may not be indigenous, but they are important. So with that, I'm not going to go through all the other criteria. I do feel with the 83 conditions, a lot of these criteria have been met. And I wish, no offense to the applicant, I wish there was a way that we keep water in the pooter. And certainly reading all the opinions, legal opinions in the packet from folks from the public, and reading through that and having doing as much study as I could on this. I have to put on my commissioner hat and feel like all the criteria have been met. And thank you for listening to my long tirade. I had to speak from my heart for a little while. Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues. So I did prepare a statement based on the discussion, and I was prepared to pivot if I needed to. So I'd like to share what I prepared. So the question before the Board of Commissioners this evening is as follows. With serious consideration to all of the public input, including what we're seeing this evening, and I appreciate that folks are being respectful with displaying their signs, but with serious consideration to all of the public input, verbal and written, does the Thornton Water Project Segment F 1041 permit, as presented in the April 22nd, May 6th public hearings, and certainly tonight's hearing, as presented by our Community Development Services team and the City of Thornton, the applicants, does it meet the review criteria of the Larimer County Land Use Code, Article 10.19, with or without reasonable conditions? And I really want to do a shout out to our environmental planner, Mr. John Barnett, and certainly our community development director and our planning manager, and of course our attorneys, especially my friend Frank over there. According to our quasi-judicial land use hearing process and our legal system, Thornton has the burden of proof and is entitled to due process. So they got more time to make their case. We commissioners must be very mindful of arbitrary decision-making and exceeding our authority according to the 1041 statutes and court decisions. I wish to express my heartfelt, if I can get through this, my heartfelt gratitude and appreciation to everyone who has participated in this process, community members, landowners, environmental and housing advocates, CSU students, advocacy groups such as Save the Poudre, No Pipe Dream, friends and allies of the Cache la Poudre River from its headwaters to its confluence with the South Platte River. Undeniably, the Poudre River as it flows through the heart of Fort Collins, represents the lifeblood of our community. And this is why so many people have spoken passionately and forcefully on its behalf to protect, preserve, and restore this lifeblood to our community. Thank you to the City of Thornton and other stakeholders who have fully engaged in this 1041 permit application process. Please allow me to state for the record that for the past month or so, I've spent countless hours discerning on this complex issue, reading, reviewing, analyzing as much of the information and inputs I could absorb to make the best possible informed decision. Frankly, I have anguished over this proposal because my decision is one of the most important and difficult ones that I will make during my tenure as a commissioner here in Larimer County, representing the interests of our community. Since 1976, this place has been home to me, and I've been blessed to develop a strong and intimate relationship with the Cache la Poudre River, especially as it runs through town, through the Martinez Park neighborhood. I've walked it, I've run, I've bicycled. We've spread ashes of family members in the river. We've spread ashes of pets in the river. We've swam in the river. We've tubed in the river, and all of that. If I could turn back the clock to 1985 and 1986, when the City of Thornton bought the farms and water rights, I believe it was about 20,000 acres of farmland, primarily in Weld County. I'll get through this, and I appreciate your bearing with me. I got to do this, folks. If we could turn back the clock, I would, so we could have a deeper discussion about the pros and cons and the full range of options for Thornton to address its long-term municipal water needs. If I could turn back the clock to 1996, 1997, when the Colorado Water Court decreed that Thornton could use its water rights for municipal purposes rather than the historic use of water for agricultural purposes, I would. So we could have a better understanding of water quality and points of diversion. If I could turn back the clock to 2014 or so, when Thornton was seriously considering the Poudre River option as one of its alternatives, I would, so we could have had a more realistic opportunity to implement this option. Larimer County can encourage the river conveyance option, but we cannot require this as part of the 1041 permit application. During these proceedings, several public commenters and advocates suggested that the 2023, getting into a rhythm here now, almost there, folks. The 2023 Thornton 1041 application is no different than the 2017 1041 permit application. I must respectfully disagree, as the pipeline proposal and process have been different, as we've discussed for a few nights now. During these proceedings, public commenters and advocates have stated that the District Court and the Court of Appeals upheld the 2019 Board of County Commissioners' decision to deny the Thornton 1041 permit application. This is correct, although their rulings were qualified ones, agreeing on the previous commissioner's denial for certain criteria and disagreeing on others, such as the Shield Street option. It has also been suggested that the Court of Appeals ruling was not published and not binding for various reasons, and this is also correct, as I understand it. However, our prudent interpretation of this is based on our county legal counsel, that this ruling sends a message of what would be decided should this matter return to the courts. In conclusion, our Community Development Services team recommends approval with the conditions of approval that are before us. Our Planning Commission recommended approval on a 5-3 vote on April 10th, I have decided to support this application because I believe this pipeline proposal meets all of the current Larimer County 1041 review criteria and sub-criteria based on the mitigation provisions that are required and necessary to be met to be approved in this 1041 permit application. Along with the conditions of approval and the proposed enhancements, I believe this is the best we can do to help protect the Poudre River, help preserve critical farmland, open space, and natural habitats, and minimize the impacts to landowners and the communities. I believe that my decision to support this application serves the interests of Larimer County residents within our 1041 and legal guidelines and provides us with a path forward. Thank you. At this time, I would entertain, unless there's further discussion, I would entertain a motion. Oh, thank goodness they put it up. A motion regarding what I believe the three of us are in agreement. Commissioner Stevens, that's your call, please.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I move that the Board of County Commissioners approves the application for a 1041 permit for the Thornton Water Transmission TWP Segment F 1041 permit, File 23, Zone 3584, subject to the conditions as recommended by staff, including the new and revised conditions as described prior to deliberation.
Thank you, Commissioner Stevens. That is a proper motion. Colleagues, is there any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. That passes 3-0.
I didn't say aye yet, sir. Sorry, aye.
I'm sorry. Could you say it again?
Aye.
All right. I believe that's 3-0. At 9:28 p.m., we have concluded our business. Thank you to everyone. Honestly, we are adjourned.